This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good Friday morning from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City. To our worldwide audience, we are also streaming on YouTube. So head over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast. That's where you will find us. Tom Keene out again today. We have no answers for you. He's
no proof of life.
I think he's out there. He was on social media talking to Lisa Mateo.
Okay.
Just, doing some stuff there. So I have no idea what's going on.
She can confirm he's doing all right.
Exactly. David Gura sitting in for Tom, which we appreciate. David, only 18 days to the election. I don't know what that means, but we're going to talk to Joe Matthew a couple of times, 3 times over the next several hours, just to kind of get the latest from the campaign trail.
Margaret Brennan as well, of course, as she's sort of speeding ahead to the election too. But yeah, we are in the throes of it here with fewer than 3 weeks to go. And these candidates are all over the place. It's a busy schedule. So we'll count on Joe to keep us up to date on what they're up to.
And David, we're going to check in with Anika Gupta to start us off here. Director of Macroeconomic Research at Wisdom Tree. Get her thoughts on his markets. Nancy Curtin, partner and Global CIO at AlTi, also going to join us here. So we got a lot of smart folks coming up towards the end of our show here in the 9 o'clock hour. Danielle DiMartino Booth, in my mind, one of the smartest voices on this Federal Reserve and interest rate policy. So we're going to get a sense of where this Fed is going to go forward, given some of the stronger than expected economic data we've seen over the last couple of weeks. We got a lot coming on over the next 3 hours. We will bring that to you. We're going to start off with Lisa Mateo, get a Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa, what do you have for us?
You got it. And right now, futures steady after Wall Street dial back Fed cut bets following that strong economic data. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up about 0.3%, 79 points. Dow futures up 28 points. We have S&P futures up about 10 points. We have the 2-year yield at 3.96%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.09%. And that is little change. To commodities, gold hit a new record, topping 2,700 for the first time. That was due to ongoing tensions in the Middle East, also that tight U.S. election race right now. I'll point out spot gold at $2,712 an ounce. We have COMEX gold, $2,727 an ounce. Oil also lowered. We have Brent crude down about 0.5% at $74 a barrel. WTI crude at $70 a barrel. Shares of CVS Health, they are down 12%. A reported preliminary adjusted earnings per share for the third quarter missed estimates, but the big news there, it's longtime executive David Joyner joining in as new chief, replacing Karen Lynch. We have shares of Netflix up 6%, added more than 5 million customers in the third quarter, topped expectations on every major financial metric, and that was despite the impact from last year's Hollywood strikes. Finally, Apple's iPhone 16 sales in China, they're up 20% in their first 3 weeks compared with 2023's model. Apple shares up about 1%. We're also getting results from Procter & Gamble, American Express in. We'll get to that in just a bit. A lot going on. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City. We're also streaming on YouTube as well here. David, what do you make? Why was Kamala Harris not at the dinner last night?
Right, this was the Al Smith dinner in New York.
Which has been around forever.
For a long time. Yeah. Catholic charities, a lot of Wall Street folks go, along with local politicians, and Donald Trump did make an appearance, as he did back in 2020 and 2016. Look, I think that she's making the calculation that she wants to spend her time on the campaign trail. She was in 3 different rallies in Wisconsin yesterday. She's in Michigan today. She submitted a video, a comedic video that they played, and I didn't watch the speeches live, but I read about them this morning. As you might expect in a room like that, a video falls a little flatter than an in-person appearance. But as you say, it's kind of this old school part of the campaign. Donald Trump, a true believer in kind of sticking with that tradition. Kamala Harris this time skipping it.
All right, for those of you on YouTube, you can see David's sweatshirt, New York Liberty WNBA. They're in the finals.
They could win it all tonight.
They can win it all tonight,
in Minnesota. They're playing the Lynx, but I'm a new convert to this team, but live near the Barclays Arena in Brooklyn, and it's just been a pleasure to watch this team. Play.
And Sabrina Ionescu was unbelievable.
And she hit 2 kind of clutch threes in the last game, one of which was at the 1 second mark in the fourth quarter.
We were talking about this. Alex and I were down at a Wells. We were at an event down in Hilton Head a couple days ago, and it was Wells Fargo sponsored event, and one of the folks we're talking to is someone who invests in sports and women's sports. And we're talking about the growth of women's sports. And it's been women's soccer has really had a growth spurt, but the women's basketball has just exploded in
Unreal.
the last
I think
4 or
they
5
had
years. And you see the ratings, and you see some of the new rights they get for their media properties now. Really amazing.
I think we had 18,000 people in the Barclays Center for the last game that we played in Brooklyn, and just incredible to go to those games. I mean, I think it's obviously it's picking up steam. They had record attendance at the game in Minnesota a couple days ago as well. And I've got a daughter who's in middle school. Just she and her friends are so psyched to have this team. So it does feel like kind of a transformational moment.
It does, yeah,
WNBA.
yeah. And Caitlin Clark also was a big
Yes.
catalyst for
Yes,
a lot
yes.
of folks as well. The news today that I'm still trying to wrap my head around and read everything that Bloomberg has. And the Wall Street Journal broke the story about CVS, the CEO. And there's a company, I mean, when you think about CVS, not CBS, the TV network, CV is in Victor, VS, I kind of thought it's just a drugstore. But then they went out and bought the Aetna pharmacy business, and I'm like, why would you do that?
I remember.
Isn't that like a really tough business with tons of regulation, and you never know who's paying you, and are they paying you the right number? I don't know.
Just a company that was really expanding, as you say, fast and furious over these last many years, and as you mentioned, just replacing its CEO this morning, expected to miss its third quarter results as well. Really going through it, and again, also sort of evincing what we've seen with retail kind of broadly, this expansion into having a lot of storefronts across the country.
Yep.
Now having to shutter a lot of those just based on the climate that we're seeing.
And the other, earnings news came out yesterday afternoon. Netflix putting up good numbers yet again. I mean, this is a company that's trying to say, hey, don't worry so much about our subscribers. Look at the profitability of our business and our free cash flow of the business, and which is all very impressive. They're extremely profitable today. They're the envy of the media industry. Disney's trying to get profitable. They're all trying to get profitable, but they also just put up some really strong subscriber numbers. So Netflix story still
kind of like Netflix and everybody else,
yes.
right? I mean, you know this world better than I and many people, but
Yep.
their streaming is so strong compared to its rivals. So
Exactly. We've got the ECB cutting, the Bank of England, kind of everybody but the Bank of Japan cutting. The question now is for the U.S. Federal Reserve. One could argue if you look at some of the stronger than expected economic data, we had retail sales yesterday that came out a little bit better than expected. This is a Fed that, coming to the next meeting, I think most people still expect them to cut, but it's not a slam dunk.
yeah, I just kind of go back to what we heard the Fed policymakers coalescing after that the last jobs report that we got. And there were some outliers, as Raphael Bostic in Atlanta saying that he'd be content to take a pause at this next meeting. I mean, Paul, I'm still thinking just about the difficulty of having this meeting on the heels of the election.
Yep,
yes, they
that's
moved
a
it by
great
a
point,
day, but I just think of myself and everyone here, how large the election looms and how difficult it is to see beyond it. And I know that Fed Chair Jerome Powell has been so adamant that the Fed is not political, it's not suffering because of the winds of politics, but it does strike me that depending on how the election goes and how long it takes to find out who won, it's going to be very difficult for policymakers of any stripe to kind of forecast out any kind of economic decisions. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to sort of how they approach that and how they talk about that in the press conference to follow. But obviously it's a unique meeting that we're looking forward to here on the 7th of November.
Yeah, exactly. 2 days after the election, again, as you mentioned, David, this is a Fed that's consistently said, as all Federal Reserves have said, that they are politically independent. And I suspect that is, in fact, the case here. And they will do kind of what they say they always do, which is they will go where the data kind of directs them. And the data, most recently, it's kind of 50-50. If they wanted to sit pat and say, hey, wait a minute, this economy is a little bit stronger than we thought, I think the market would generally be okay with that. But that's just over the last week or so. We've seen some strength in the markets, and you're saying, okay, maybe this market doesn't have to have another rate cut come November. So we'll have to see how that plays out. With our news in New York City, here is Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, and Lisa. The Israeli military says it has killed Hamas's top leader, Yahya Sinwar, during a battle in Gaza. Sinwar was one of the chief architects of Hamas's attack on Israel last year that sparked the war in Gaza. President Biden says the death of Sinwar is a chance to seek a path to peace. Biden, who was in Berlin, also spoke as an advocate for Ukraine as the years-long war to eject the Russian invaders continues.
The dream of Europe, whole and free, remains the work of our time. Nor is that work more urgent than in pushing back against Putin's vicious attack against Ukraine.
President Biden made his comments as he accepted the highest honor the German government can give to individuals for public service, the Order of Merit of the Federal Republic of Germany. Former President Trump spoke at the New York Archdiocese annual Al Smith dinner last night. Vice President Harris was on video but did not attend in person, which Trump seized on.
Catholics, you got to vote for me. Just remember. You better remember I'm here, and she's not. I could have done that too.
Harris instead made multiple stops across the state of Wisconsin.
Part of my plan is about helping entrepreneurs start and grow small businesses.
Harris and Trump will be in Michigan today. The Texas Supreme Court halted last night's scheduled execution of a man who would have become the first person in the U.S. put to death for a murder conviction tied to a diagnosis of shaken baby syndrome. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Looking at American Express stock down just a little bit here. They reported some numbers. They raised their full-year guidance again after reporting earnings that beat estimates as consumers continue to turn to the rewards-rich credit cards. I have the green card. I've been offered like the black, the green, the yellow. I mean,
All
I'm sticking with the classic green American Express
Centurion
exactly.
on the front of it. Yes,
exactly.
No, pridefully. No, it's I note these earnings as well. I was kind of flagged whenever these ads that they have some deal with Resi now. Yep. They're trying to get more people to use them for the perks of the cards, and they've kind of been like an outsider in that. I think of the other kind of credit card issuers who have been really promoting point system, added rewards. Amex a little bit behind the curve on that, but now it seems to be panning out.
The younger gen, like my daughter, is the queen of points. Like she'll go to Europe with a friend, and it's all on points, and they're amazing. I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, do you do the point
points
thing?
I do.
Lisa, you're a point person?
I use them because I have a JetBlue card, and I use that to fly everywhere.
All right, yeah, I do that.
I'm impressed when it works out. I feel like I've got, like, with all these frequent flyers, catch can, I can't get enough to actually do anything with them.
Exactly. All right, here's the CEO, American Express. We've had 10 consecutive quarters of record revenue. We had a really good quarter. We beat our own expectations in Street 2, raising guidance. We see nothing wrong with the fourth quarter. So, I mean, American Express, the stock's up 52% year to date. Company's got a $200 billion market cap. When I think about the global financial institutions, sometimes I forget about American Express. This thing's huge, and it's global, and the stock has done just phenomenal, great returns on equity and capital. It's just one of those ones at least I kind of forget about every once in a while. So American Express putting up some good numbers. Looking at the futures here, S&P up a little bit, the Dow off just fractionally, the NASDAQ up about 0.4%. So we got a mixed equity markets here. It's a little early in the morning, but Tom Keene's probably enjoying an aperitif at the moment. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got a little mix of red and green on the screen, and this after traders roll back expectations of interest rate cuts. That was following solid retail sales yesterday. Today, more data on tap. We have housing starts. That's at 8:30 Wall Street time. We also have more Fed speak from Christopher Waller and also Anil Kashkari. Futures, let's get to it. NASDAQ futures up about 0.4%, 92 points. Dow futures, little change, down about 32 points. We have S&P futures up about 11 points. To the bond market, the The 2-year yield, 3.97%. That's a little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.10%, and that's up about 1 basis point. To currencies, we have the dollar weaker, Japanese yen stronger at 150 against the dollar. Then we have the euro stronger, British pound stronger. That strengthened after British retail sales unexpectedly rose in September. It's up about 0.2% at 130.46 against the dollar. To earnings we go, and you said it, yeah, it looks like consumers tapping those rewards-rich credit cards. American Express raised its full-year guidance again after reporting earnings that beat estimates. Then on the flip side, your Procter & Gamble, they posted another quarter of sluggish sales growth, and that was due to minimal price increases, weaknesses in areas like skin and baby care. Shares are down about 0.1%. Finally, Chinese battery manufacturer CATL reported net income for the third quarter that missed the average estimates. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Michael Barr just reporting on the Peter Frampton Hall of Fame. Frampton Comes Alive, arguably the best live album of all time. Unfortunately, there is no one here in this radio operation that I can discuss this album with. It is such a shame. No one with any history whatsoever. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. He's probably on his first Prosecco of the day over in Italy somewhere. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube, so head over to youtube.com, search Bloomberg Podcast. I want to bring in Nancy Curtin, partner, Global CIO, head of investment advisory at AlTi Tiedemann Global. Hey, Nancy, we're just kind of getting into the teeth of the earnings, but we had some good numbers out of American Express today. The big banks put up some really good numbers. I mean, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan. What do you take away so far from what we've seen coming out of corporate America earnings-wise?
Okay, so we're early innings in the third quarter, but so far so good. Banks, as you said, were pretty strong. Trading, they're benefiting from the volatility in markets. We think investment banking will probably pick up. And I think they indicated quite nicely on improvement in net interest margins. We had Netflix overnight. TSMC rather dispelled the fact that there's a problem in demand for Gen AI. So I think that reads well into NVIDIA earnings. That's coming towards the end of November, as you know. Look, there's a low bar for the third quarter. Expectations are 4%. And I think companies are going to leap right over it. So we think this quarter will be strong. But really what's important for our clients and our positioning is looking ahead to the fourth quarter and 2025, where we still expect earnings to continue to accelerate as central banks ease.
Well, Nancy, let's talk about that as you try to look ahead to the fourth quarter. And obviously there's an election between now and then looming large. And I'm curious just about kind of the panoply of risks that you see here. Yes, there's the election results. There's this Federal Reserve meeting that we were talking about just a few moments ago. I'm looking at just sort of how much gold has gone up in price here in recent days. How are you thinking about risk, and how is that kind of shaping your perspective as you look ahead to the fourth quarter?
Well, first of all, it's important to remain diversified, which is what we do. We don't just have equities. We've got things like private credit and infrastructure and gold. Gold, as you mentioned, hit 2,700 overnight. That's been a really, really nice diversifier and ballast in client portfolios. So it's not just about equities. And I think given the strength in market that we've seen already year to date, a pullback on any of those event type things and data things that you said coming ahead, we've got a PCE, we've got a jobs number that's going to be a bit mixed up with the hurricane and Boeing and so on and so forth. And then we got the election, and then we've got the Fed. So, short term, you never know with markets could easily pull back. They've been super strong. But remember, last Saturday, we celebrated happy birthday 2-year anniversary. Typically when you make it to 2 years, you make it to 3 years, 70% of the time, and data going back to like 1949. And remember, the average length of a bull market in the United States is 5 years and 100%. We've done 60 and 2 years. So we got to look forward to 2025. And all things being equal, unless there's some big resurgence of inflation, Middle East upset, whatever, we are still constructive, positive on the outlook.
Hey, Nancy, we had some conflicting results coming out of some of the big chip makers over the last week. ASML had a little bit of a warning there, actually a big warning, let's be honest. But then Taiwan Semiconductor came back strong yesterday. As someone who thinks of the chip business as kind of a proxy for this whole AI trade here, I'm not sure if it's a trade or it's a long-term theme. How did you kind of deal with those two earnings announcements. How do you think about the tech space and AI, given what we've seen from the chip makers?
So look, ASML was a bit of a howler there, that's for sure. But, and we haven't gotten full clarification, but the press release from the company talked about the fact that it's really not in the AI side. It's more in what I call, easier electronics, et cetera, some weakness in end markets of where they sell some of their less advanced so-called, chip equipment into. So we don't think that plays into at all that there's going to be weakness in NVIDIA. Jensen Huang has made it pretty clear. Demand is on fire. TSMC is forecasting 30% growth in revenue. So we think the Gen AI and demand for chips is very much alive and well. So much so that there could be some near-term shortages as we head into 2025 in components, chips, et cetera. And funny enough, before we get to the big productivity boom of Gen AI, we could have a bit of inflation that comes from these shortages. So something we're keeping an eye on.
Nancy, I think the last time that you and I spoke, China had unveiled maybe the first of these initiatives to do fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus. There was great excitement about that. Then that ebbed as there was some skepticism about what that actually meant and how China might implement it. We got these new growth figures today, which I think are on the low end for the last six quarters, but some more clarity from the Chinese central bank this morning. How are you looking at China as you kind of look at the investment landscape globally and processing what we've heard both from policymakers there on the fiscal side and monetary policy side?
So the good news is in China, it's kind of Houston, we have a problem, right? So finally, China is dealing with both the deflation and slowdown in the economy. But we believe the fiscal and monetary stimulus so far is not kind of in the Draghi school of whatever it takes, right? We think China probably needs $1.5 trillion of stimulus, fiscal and monetary combined, with an emphasis on the fiscal. They've done about a third of that, or at least hinted at something like that. So we don't think it's enough. More importantly, China has some big structural issues, right? It's got a very high savings rate. It's got an aging demographic, unemployment in double digit, and lack of a social safety net. So that is really a problem for consumption, particularly as a lot of those consumers put their money in the property market, which isn't doing too well. And then they've got a strategy for export growth, right? Let's be manufacturing renaissance, be the world's leader in manufacturing. The problem is if their domestic economy is weak, that creates excess capacity that they want to ship to the rest of the world. The rest of the world doesn't want it. And so that brings tariffs and trade tensions and the like. So look, we think there are some cheap Chinese shares. There is some value in the market. But overall, we think the combination of structural and cyclical, not yet dealt with by the Chinese authorities. But the good news is it's removed what I call the tail risk of China kind of dragging the world lower with it. So in that sense, the monetary and fiscal stimulus is a positive from an overall global growth perspective.
Nancy, thanks so much for joining us. As always, appreciate getting your thoughts and your perspective. Nancy Curtin, folks, she's a partner. She's a global CIO. She's the head of investment advisory at AlTi Tiedemann Global. Nancy's been on Global Wall Street for decades, and we appreciate getting her perspective there. I don't know, for China, ever since they cracked down on the technology 6, 7, 8 years ago, I kind of felt like it was uninvestable. And we get Damian Sassower, who does all the emerging markets, but he always reminds us it's a third of the MSCI. You can't ignore it.
Can't ignore it completely, and you can be skeptical about the data too. I know there's still concern about what we're actually getting from the Chinese government.
Yeah, exactly. But those long-term trends are really troubling for China, particularly the demographics, the birth rate, and so on. So we'll have to see how that plays out. S&P futures a little bit on the upside, up 13. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by BNY. BNY's expertise and insights can help clients achieve their ambitions. Visit BNY.com. All right, we have futures. A little mix of red and green on the screen. NASDAQ futures, though, leading the charge up about 0.4%, 100 points. Dow futures down 23 points. We have S&P futures up about 12. A recovery in big tech looks to extend. That's thanks to results from Netflix. Those shares up about 6%. To the bond market, the 2-year yield, 3.98%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.10%, and that's up about 1 basis point. Companies making news. Samsung Electronics. Reuters says it's reportedly postponing taking deliveries of ASML chip-making equipment for its upcoming factory over in Texas. And the information reporting, U.S. investigating whether Taiwan's semiconductor has been making AI or smartphone chips for Huawei. That's in breach of export rules. TSM ADR is down about 0.5%. And sources say Tesla's full self-driving system facing a federal investigation into whether it's defective after 4 crashes, one of which was fatal. Tesla shares right now down about 0.5%. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live as well. That would be the video thing. I think that's on the internet. So check out this youtube.com. I think it might be www in there somewhere. And search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you kind of find us. You can get the video. We got the cameras in here, the lights, the whole 9 yards. So we're all set. 18 days, David, to the
18
election?
days.
Okay, I mailed in my vote already.
Very good.
So I'm all sealed. It was actually pretty easy. Just, easy peasy. As I'm not even sure where I'm supposed to vote anymore, so I just mailed it in. Literally, I mailed it in. That's such a great thing. But somebody who has to do this stuff for a living besides David Gura is Joe Matthew. He is the host of Bloomberg's Balance of Power. Mr. Matthew, you're down in D.C. God bless you for doing, that God's work down there. Can you explain to me the importance of the Al Smith dinner? It's in New York City. President Trump was there. Vice President Harris was not. Talk to us about that dinner and why it's important in politics.
I'm feeling really overdressed this morning.
Yes, for our
Happy
YouTube
Friday.
audience. I wearing a sweatshirt.
Gents.
Yeah, Paul as well.
Yeah, but
And golf casual.
Well, I mean,
'cause
look,
you never know when somebody's going to walk by.
I'm wondering if it is important. Kamala Harris didn't show up last night, and we'll find out if that matters. I never thought we'd be talking about Mary Catherine Gallagher.
Yes,
here on Surveillance,
Saturday
but she
Night
sent
Live
a video.
character.
Kamala
Yes,
Harris.
yes.
Yeah, this is the Molly Shannon Catholic schoolgirl making fun of Catholic school. Strange, I guess, audience for that particular joke. We heard as much booing as clapping and laughing from both of them, guys. The fact is, Al Smith dinner, and by the way, Donald Trump did point out the last presidential candidate to skip it was Walter Mondale.
Oh,
you can just
good
leave
fact
that
at
wherever
hand.
you want.
Excellent. Okay.
But, it's supposed to be fun and lighthearted and good-spirited. Donald Trump insulted her intelligence, questioned the manhood of her running mate, and insulted the intelligence of her husband, talking about an affair that he had, all of that. He had nicer things to say about Eric Adams and Chuck Schumer, strangely. But it was kind of a bizarre night, I have to admit. Cardinal Dolan wasn't real happy that Kamala Harris did not go. It was a who's who of billionaires up on the dais. Donald Trump was reading from notes, trying to land a couple of jokes. Some of them worked, some of them didn't.
All in white tie and tails, and as you say, Chuck Schumer on the dais right next to him, next to former President Trump there.
Shaking his head.
Let's talk about where Vice President Harris was, if not there. I know that she's been kind of laser focused on the Midwest this week. What kind of events has she been having? And sort of what does that say about her strategy as we push ahead here to Election Day in early November?
Well, you know all about the interviews. We've had some big ones this week, and the ratings on the Fox interview topped any others that we've seen in this campaign cycle, almost 8 million eyeballs. But it's really been about the swing states, and we're moving on to Michigan today. She did take time, by the way, to highlight Donald Trump's insult of Detroit last night, because he's going to Detroit. This whole campaign moves to Michigan tonight, and they're going to be there for the balance of the weekend, guys. Early voting starts in Detroit tomorrow. And so Kamala Harris will be there to promote that. And we've learned that the Obamas are going to join them on the trail. Next week, Barack Obama will be in Detroit sharing a stage with Kamala Harris, which we haven't seen yet. And the former First Lady, you think about who are the most powerful and impactful surrogates Kamala Harris has. More than Oprah Winfrey, more than Barack Obama, is Michelle Obama. And a week from tomorrow, she will be on the stage. That's going to be the closing optic, it sounds like, or it looks like, for this Harris campaign as we make our way to November 5th.
Hey, Joe, is there any feeling within the Democratic circles in D.C. that maybe former President Obama and Michelle have not done enough to date?
Look, there are questions, I suspect, about that. More maybe for Michelle Obama, because we literally have not seen her on the trail. Just that one speech at the DNC. Barack Obama was in Pittsburgh, and he's been doing a series of events. He'll be in Georgia next week. I think the idea, though, was to, you save the secret weapon for last. Having Barack Obama do 45 rallies around the country might water down the impact, I think, is how the campaign sees that. But it's not just the Obamas. They had Mark Cuban out there stumping for her yesterday, trying to push her business bona fides. It was kind of interesting watching him read off the phone as he was trying to remember the jokes that he had planned. But she has no shortage of celebrity surrogates. I wonder if we'll see Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen share a stage together.
Would be good. Co-authors of a book, I know. On to more serious matters here. We had the killing of Yahya Sinwar yesterday, and that's certainly something that these candidates have addressed. Vice President Harris taking time while she was in Wisconsin to deliver a statement. Talk a bit, if you would, Joe, just about how much foreign policy, and that war in the Middle East in particular, has kind of crept into this campaign. I think back on a few months ago, a lot of folks said, look, no one in the American electorate cares about foreign policy. It's a thing to be avoided. But time and time again, through the few debates that we've had, onto the campaign trail, this has percolated, become something that both these candidates have had to address.
It's true. It's been something for Joe Biden to manage, as we discussed, David, on the campaign trail during the primary season. Remember the uncommitted vote in places like Michigan, which we're talking about. Arab American voters, Islamic American voters were not happy with the Biden administration's policy when it came to Israel. Whether they're keying off of the killing of Yahya Sinwar it's a great question. I don't think we have any way really to measure that. But knowing that Michigan is as close as it is, knowing that Pennsylvania is as close as it is, and Wisconsin, when we factor in that population, it is something that Kamala Harris is certainly aware of and trying to strike a little bit of distance from Joe Biden here. You might have seen her at the podium yesterday. She was speaking for the White House. That was a moment for an opportunity to use a word that she used, because Joe Biden was in the air on Air Force One on his way to Germany. At this point, though, go back to that Bret Baier interview this week on Fox. She said it will not be a continuation of the Biden White House if she's elected. We'll see how much difference she strikes in the next 2 weeks.
Joe, what, if any, role will President Biden play, do you think, in this campaign over the next 3 weeks? I know he's over in Europe now doing a little victory lap over there, but what do you think? How do you think that's going to play out?
I don't know how much they're going to use him. I don't know how much he helps. They might prefer that he stays home for some of these. Like, he's going to go to Scranton. He's going to go to the areas in Pennsylvania, probably Michigan, where he might have an impact. There are probably some areas of the country, though, where they don't want to use Joe Biden, and they don't want people to go home with this idea that this is Biden 2.0. Kamala Harris needs to move on her own here. So I would be surprised to see them spending a lot of time together on stage. He'll probably be traveling on his own to help her to the extent that he can.
Joe, you talk about how he might be deployed in Pennsylvania. Let's talk about how Kamala Harris's opponent is deploying Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, who has, as I understand it, spent a substantial amount of money in that state in particular, and he's now doing this kind of round of town halls in the state. We had a piece on the Bloomberg this morning just about how often former President Trump invokes Elon Musk, how much reverence he has for him, how much he talks about him on the campaign trail. Talk, if you would, Joe, just about the role that he is playing, yes, as somebody that Trump can kind of hold up as a prominent supporter whom he would use if he's elected again, but also as someone who's really bankrolling a lot of this campaign apparatus.
Yeah, it's a massive, just sunk another $75 million into the super PAC that's largely paying for Donald Trump's ground game at this point. Listening to Elon Musk, though, it's really interesting. He's standing up there in the MAGA hat in front of the massive American flag yesterday, invoking the images of Mad Max and a zombie apocalypse if Kamala Harris were elected. Look, he's all in here, guys. I don't know what it's going to mean for Elon Musk if Donald Trump doesn't win. What kind of a relationship he would have with the Harris administration, but there's no guessing where he stands, and his money speaks for it here as a top Trump donor. But look, a big argument over rhetoric has been underway here. The Trump camp has demonized Kamala Harris and Joe Biden for suggesting that he would be the end of democracy. They say that's why these attempted assassinations have taken place. But that is exactly the language that Elon Musk has been using about Kamala Harris, saying that, in fact, if she wins, there will never be another election.
Wow. Joe Matthew, thank you so much for joining us. Joe Matthew, Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television. He
can
is
lose the tie.
in.
He can lose the tie for the next hit.
Yeah, he can. I mean, we're going casual Friday. He didn't get the memo, obviously. Joe Matthew, Balance of Power down in Washington, D.C. And David, that article in the Bloomberg Terminal you're mentioning, Trump mentioned Elon Musk 82 times. Since the Tesla and SpaceX chief executive publicly endorsed the former president in July through the end of September. Musk, who has funneled $75 million to the pro-Trump PAC he founded, isn't just any billionaire dabbling in politics. He and his 6 companies overseas have a lot to gain or lose, I guess, from who sits in the White House next year. So some great reporting from the Bloomberg team there with our news in New York City. Here is Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, Lisa. The U.S. says it will push toward a ceasefire in Gaza after Israel killed Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas and the mastermind of the October 7th attacks. President Biden spoke to reporters after landing in Berlin, Germany.
Now's the time to move on. Move toward a ceasefire in Gaza.
President Biden says he's sending Secretary of State Antony Blinken to Israel as part of efforts to end the war with Hamas. President Biden is in Berlin for a day of closed-door meetings with European allies about Russia's war in Ukraine and the conflict in the Middle East. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump will campaign in Michigan today. Harris starts in Grand Rapids before holding events in Lansing and Oakland County, northwest of Detroit. Trump has his own event in Oakland County in the afternoon before holding a rally in Detroit in the evening. Finally, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony is Saturday, and one of those being inducted, Peter Frampton. I'm here for you, Paulie.
Thank you.
Don't worry. The guitarist performed with Sheryl Crow during her induction last year and things. That may have helped him get chosen for the induction this year.
I think Sheryl Crow, thank you, Sheryl, always. Inviting me to play made a big difference, yes. I think that possibly people even on the board didn't realize I wasn't in, which is wild.
Frampton has been available to get in the Rock Hall since 1997. Yeah, why this long? Because this is Frampton. From Frampton Comes Alive, the album, and Do You Feel Like We Do? Man made the guitar talk.
That's right.
He made the guitar talk.
I'm trying, Michael Barr.
Where is Tom Keene when you need him now?
By the way, the induction held at the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse in Cleveland. Global news, 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael Barr. Have you been to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in Cleveland?
No, but I did go to the induction ceremony a few years ago, back when it was here in New York.
Okay.
So I did check it out. That was nice.
Yeah, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Just one of my marketing trips to Cleveland. Carved out a couple hours.
It's a beautiful building.
Awesome.
Yes.
It's fantastic. They did a great job there. Really starting way back in starting in jazz and then going to the British invasion all the way through. So I think they did a great job. And Cleveland is one of those markets that historically was a great radio market, is a great radio market, and they were one of the first markets to really have a few DJs there back in the 50s to really embrace kind of rock and roll and that kind of stuff. So that's why it kind of landed there. You could have argued Philadelphia or New York, but Cleveland, was just historically a great rock and roll radio market with a handful of stations and a handful of DJs who back in the early day really embraced it. So some good stuff there. Looking at the market here, kind of a mixed tape here. S&P, it's up 12 points. The Dow's off 65 points. NASDAQ up 105 points. That's a 0.5%. 10-year Treasury yields 4.10%. How about that? We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks are mixed with NASDAQ futures leading the charge right now, up about 0.4%, 100 points. We have Dow futures down 0.1%, 66 points. S&P futures up 0.2%, or 11 points. The two-year yield 3.98%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.11%, and that is up 1 basis point. To commodities, we have Brent crude $74 a barrel, down about 0.3%. WTI crude $70 a barrel. Spot gold $2,710 an ounce. We have COMEX gold $2,725 an ounce. Warren Buffett unloading more shares of Bank of America after the lender repurchased enough of its own shares to bring his stake back above 10%. Then we have New York Community Bank's Flagstar Bank eliminating 700 jobs, or 8% of its workforce. And sticking with banks, Bloomberg reporting a London headhunter allegedly used fake names, made up job opportunities to get confidential information about traders at some of the world's biggest banks. Odin Partners, though, does deny those claims. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. Bloomberg Surveillance today. It's brought to you by IBKR. With Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader, you can trade your views on the 2024 elections. Just answer yes or no. Visit ibkr.com/forecast. and get started today. Let's talk about sustainability. Let's talk about food security, some big kind of ticket list to be talking about here. We have the Bloomberg 2024 Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst list. One of the members of that list, as Bloomberg thinks about the new economy, is Lisa Bryson. She's the CEO of Air Protein. She joins us via Zoom. Lisa, thanks so much for joining us here. First of all, just tell us what Air Protein is. What are you guys thinking about? What are you guys doing at Air Protein?
Well, at Air Protein, we're thinking about how to make food, how to make it sustainably. We have 8 billion people on the planet. As we get more and more people on the planet, how can we make food in a way that is healthy, nutritious, but also doesn't require as much arable land and also doesn't have a huge carbon footprint?
So, Lisa, talk to us about just food sustainability, food security. Can you frame that out for us? How big of an issue is that? And it's Lisa Dyson. I'm sorry, I apologize. I mispronounced your name to begin with. But I'd love for you to just talk about just the big concept of food security.
If you think about, supply chains, and during COVID, we saw supply chains break. We saw shelves at our grocery stores that were empty, and it was, shocking to many of us. So how can we make food that doesn't have these complex supply chains coming in from all over the world, where we can make food locally, we can make it in a way that requires minimal footprint, minimal land, and make it very quickly. So the process that we're developing and commercializing right now at Air Protein is based on work done by NASA during the space program, where they asked the question, how can you feed astronauts on a long space journey without acres and acres of farmland? And one of the ideas that they came up with, we are commercializing now. And it's a way of making food with just elements of the air, water, and energy from any location that has those available, and in a matter of hours.
It's so wild to think about. And so you mentioned that this is something that was sort of born out of the space program in the 1970s. How far did NASA take this, and why did it kind of go fallow for so long? Why did they give up on it? And sort of what was the moment when you and others on your team thought this is something that you could kind of move from a proof of concept and get into something that could actually be commercially viable?
This wasn't needed to go to the moon, but scientists were thinking, when we go to the moon, we're going to then start thinking about going to Mars and beyond. However, we stopped going, with the space program, the Apollo space program in particular ended. And that's why they didn't continue to work on this. So it was pretty much sitting on the shelf. It was just ideas, essentially, with some initial scientific research. When we took it off the shelf and asked the question, how can we take these concepts and really make something that's economically attractive, because that's what's required in order to scale it, that is highly nutritious, way of making food, and also can achieve what you need in our food system today. So if you think about it, you go into a grocery store and you have on the edges, you have your produce, your fresh fruits and vegetables. I love kale, and you have, your meats and your seafood as well. But the bulk of a grocery store are foods with ingredients. And so what we're actually making with this technology that we're commercializing, our air fermentation technology, and we're making ingredients that are really rich in nutrients, and we're really focusing on high protein ingredients first. So you can make everything from pasta to cereals. It's actually a flour. It's a high protein flour. So you can make pasta cereals, protein bars, protein shakes. You can make lots of things. So you can use this ingredient for sauces or what have you. And it is now what we're developing is something that is for the food industry to make the foods that we love in a way that's very nutritious and sustainable.
So, Dr. Dyson, can you give us a sense of kind of where you are on deploying this technology? Because quite frankly, I'm having a very hard time envisioning it.
Okay. Well, in order to envision it, what it looks like is it looks like a cheese or yogurt facility, a factory, like how we make cheese and yogurt. It's fermentation. And, fermentation is how we make beer and wine as well. So that's what it looks like. And we're scaling up. We have great investors and partners. Barclays is an investor, Ford Foundation. We have Archer James Midland as an investor and partner, and we're scaling up production as we speak. It's something that, as you can imagine, it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time, it takes effort, it takes energy, and we're on that journey. And we're working with our first customers now to take our air protein flour and incorporate it into a number of nutritious or a number of foods with this nutritious ingredient.
I just wanted to ask you maybe lastly about the significance of being on this list. So our colleagues have put you on this list of catalysts, the Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst list. There are 16 inventors, entrepreneurs, visionaries, activists, and investors. As you kind of chart the growth and evolution of your company, how much do things like this mean? And I think picking up on what Paul was saying just a moment ago, sort of what's the next step here as you scale your company?
Yeah, it's an honor to be on this list. It's an honor to be amongst the other innovators that are on this list, and to go out to Brazil, really to the conference to meet with a lot of different people. So what's important at this stage in our growth is our partnerships. What's important are working with the large food companies that are out there to really find out their needs and how our solution can uniquely address their needs. If I'm a food company, I'm looking for ingredients that are low cost, that are healthy, nutritious, and that allow me to create the foods that my consumers will love. And so really that's what we're looking for, is how can we help them with their supply chain issues, supply chain complexity, bring a sustainable, secure supply chain solution to their ingredient needs, as it were.
Lisa, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate you taking the time. Lisa Dyson, she's the CEO at Air Protein and also a member of the 2024 Bloomberg New Economy Catalyst list, with some really smart people doing some really smart things across, the economy, and certainly dealing with issues such as food security.
And this New Economy Forum taking place early next week, as I understand it. Our colleague Eric Schatzker down in Brazil for that conference, and this is one part, I gather, of the event that he is putting on there. And I know that our editor-in-chief, John Micklethwaite, is going to be there interviewing Bill Gates. So really focusing on Brazil, which I know from your experience at Bloomberg Intelligence, this is a huge frontier market and poses a big opportunity for a lot of investors.
Eric Schatzker, the guy pops up
Yes.
5-6 times a year, different places
Incredible
on the
job.
planet, putting on these amazing conferences that I'd never even think of. And Eric Schatzker, again, he's in all over the world doing
He pops
these
up,
things.
and when he is here, he is really working all the time, finding guests and really working at a very granular level on putting together these events. But they are a big deal when he does them.
Yeah,
It's
and
big,
they're
big invites and
yes,
great guests.
And big topics that a lot of us don't even have the time to think about, but Eric does, and he finds the smart people around the world that think as well about these big important topics, and brings them together. So that'll be very cool. So it's good to check in with Dr. Dyson at Air Protein. there. Looking at the markets here as we are, 95 minutes away from the open. You get the S&P up 13 points, the Dow down 45, the NASDAQ up 100 points. So we'll see how that plays out. Yields higher, folks. I'm not going to be refinancing my mortgage anytime soon. The 10-year Treasury now at 4.1%, up another 1.5 basis points. I'm going to keep an eye on WTI crude oil. It's kind of steady here the last couple of days, just below $71 a barrel. Gold, a new high, $2,724 per ounce. Mike McGlone, Bloomberg Intelligence. A nice call, dude.
Feels like the first time. Feels like the very first time. It feels like the first time. It feels like the very first time.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Apple's still minting more money than God, right?
Geopolitics front and center for global Wall Street.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off of another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
U.S. Secretary of State discussed the conflict in Gaza.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to check in with Lara Rhame. She's the chief economist at FS Investments. I think the economy is landing pretty softly. I'm not sure. We'll check in with her. Gautam Mukunda, lecturer at Yale University on politics in the 2024 presidential race. I'll leave that to David Gura. I have no idea what's going on there. Anna Rathbun, CIO at CBIZ. She's discussed macro risks and opportunities and what she believes is a difficult investing environment. S&P 500 up over 20%. A lot of folks are making money just being long equity risk. Is that enough here? All right, let's start it off here. We'll check in with Lisa Mateo with a Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa.
You got it. We've got futures a little bit mixed after Wall Street dialed back those Fed cut bets. That was following strong economic data. So we get to NASDAQ futures up about 0.5%, 102 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 52 points. S&P futures up about 0.2%, or 12 points. The two-year yield to 3.98%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.11%, and that's up about 1 basis point. To commodities, gold hit a new record, topping 2,700 for the first time right now. We'll check in with spot gold, up about 0.6%, $2,710 an ounce. Oil edging right now, down about 0.1%. That's for Brent crude, $74 a barrel. WTI crude at about $70 a barrel. Shares of CVS Health falling, down 10%. The company reported preliminary adjusted earnings per share third quarter. Missed estimates, but yeah, the big news, this longtime executive David Joyner, he's joining in as new chief, replacing Karen Lynch. And we have shares of Netflix. They're up about 6%. It added more than 5 million customers in the third quarter. That really topped expectations on every major financial metric, and that was even despite the fact of last year's Hollywood strikes. And meanwhile, World Wrestling Entertainment, they say they're going to debut a behind-the-scenes documentary series on Netflix. It's part of an expanding partnership. If The Rock is there, I will be tuning in. And finally, Apple's iPhone 16 shares in China up up 20% in their first 3 weeks compared with 2023's model. Shares up more than 1% right now. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
Lisa, I was shocked to learn that David Gura is a big WWE fan.
No.
I am
really?
No.
No, I was
okay.
misinformed.
Fake news
Fake
here.
news. Okay, shocking. Okay,
I didn't know that
really
you were a
shocked
fan of The
me.
Rock, though.
Yes.
Dwayne
yes.
Johnson.
Big fan.
Big
yes.
fan.
Tom
Dwayne
even
The Rock
tweeted
Johnson.
a picture to me.
Yes.
Over the weekend just to remind me. So thank you, Tom Keene,
The
wherever
Rock.
you are.
Very good. All right, good stuff there, Lisa Matei. We appreciate that. David Gura, he's sitting in for Tom Keene, doing the best that he can, folks. Stay with him. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive broker studio, streaming live on YouTube as well. Bloomberg Surveillance today. It is brought to you by Cohn Resnick, Advisory Assurance Tax. Discover game-changing strategies to maximize value, optimize performance, and manage risk. Put your business at the forefront. I don't know. I think about 6-8 months ago, I called a soft landing. I'm like, I think this is a soft landing. I'm not an economist, although I did take some, economic courses at Duke, and I did okay. But I mean, it feels like a soft landing. Let's see what the experts say. Lara Rhame joins us. She's the chief economist at FS Investments. Lara, given some of the economic data we've seen recently, I guess most recently was the strong retail sales. It seems like this economy's doing fairly well, if not better than fairly well. How do you think about it?
I think what we're seeing is a little bit of a difference between the growth data that you alluded to with the retail sales numbers and the employment data, which does seem like the trajectory is slowing more notably. Okay. I think all of this adds up to a soft landing, but I think you bring up something really important. If you look at the GDP data, it still looks like there's no landing. We're still growing at a pace that's well above potential. And I think really reflects a consumer that just is truly unstoppable. When we look ahead, however, I think we are in for an incremental slowdown in GDP growth. We're probably going to see business investment take a pause. A lot of uncertainty right now about regulation around the election. And I think we're going to see government spending also downshift to neutral from being a pretty powerful tailwind. But you add it all up, I think today where you see the soft landing more specifically is in the labor market data, where we are starting to see a cooling picture. Not cold, but cooling.
Lara, you walk us through sort of how you're thinking about all of this. As you listen to Fed policymakers walk us through the way that they're approaching this next meeting, which is going to take place just a day or two after the presidential election, what are you listening for? I'll note that Chris Waller is speaking today, I think in Vienna, Austria. We're going to hear from Neil Kashkari as well. Is the commentary that we're getting, is it cacophonous? Are we hearing some of that unanimity that a lot of people thought was eroding after the last meeting? What stands out to you? What are you listening for when these policymakers speak?
I think the only thing that they're unanimous about is that they're going to have to be data dependent when they're looking ahead to 2025. Listen, the inflation data has absolutely come down enough to open a window of opportunity for the Fed to correct rates down and sort of keep them in line with real Fed funds rates. You know, when we see inflation coming down, just the nominal Fed funds rate starts to look a little bit more restrictive. So I think that's the adjustment that they're making today. And 225 basis point rate cuts at the next two meetings has always been my forecast. I think where I deviate more significantly is into next year, because I think they're going to really take a pause. They're going to wait and see how the economy is evolving. And I feel like they take flack for having this sort of data dependent view, but I think they have to, because I don't think inflation's totally gone. I think it's, I think the boogeyman's under the bed. I don't think it's just gone for good.
Lara, let's talk in the labor market here. From my perspective, this is a fully employed economy because all of the Sweeney offspring are gainfully employed. So to me, that's
very good
fully
to hear.
employed economy. What do the numbers tell you about kind of where the labor market is today and where there might be some risks?
It's interesting that it's evolved into almost a two-speed labor market, because when you look at the hiring data, it's declined. It's looking weaker than it was before the pandemic, and it's eroding somewhat. But when you look at the layoffs data, it's also very low. So, people aren't losing their jobs en masse, which is really just what's so critical to keep household consumption going and consumer confidence where it is. But when you look at job opportunities, clearly that churn that we saw after the pandemic is really gone now. And you're seeing the hiring side of things looking cooler. But, to me, the canary in the coal mine is always the weekly initial jobless claims. We are seeing some elevation there because of the hurricanes that have devastated some local communities. But overall, outside of that, they're still fairly low. And of course, nothing gets the market's attention like the monthly payroll report, which I think is going to continue to show a steady unemployment rate at around 4.1%, and hiring that's strong enough to keep that unemployment rate steady where it is.
Bearing in mind what you're saying about how the Fed's going to be data driven and we have to be as well, let me just ask you about some of the softer data. And we had that consumer confidence number a few weeks back, which I think spooked a lot of people, consumers less confident in the economy, where it is now and where it's headed. How do you factor that into the way that you are forecasting and thinking about the economy, just the sense that consumers have about the U.S. economy directionally? I noted in the last Conference Board report, this sort of heightened interest in what the Fed is doing and where interest rates are going.
You bring up such an important point, because the consumer confidence data have been lackluster, have been weak really since the pandemic. And that's despite, a very strong labor market. And despite the fact that while consumers say they're a little more downbeat on the economy, they're still out spending like gangbusters. So it's hard for me to connect those dots today, given that the data has just sent such mixed signals. We read the consumer confidence data closely because it comes out early. But of course, what really matters for all of us is what their consumers are actually doing, not what they say they're worried about. That said, we cannot just ignore it. So it's something I think that I'm hoping we'll get better after the election. I think that's weighing on sentiment, just the uncertainty. And I think that, as consumers slowly get used to interest rates at a higher for longer place, some of that concern around what they're able to do, afford, and what houses they're able to buy is going to normalize a little bit. I just think a lot of people are waiting for us to come back to a very low rate environment, and I don't think it's going to happen.
All right, so I'm not refinancing my mortgage is what you're telling me anytime soon. Lara Rhame, thanks so much for joining us. Lara Rhame, Chief Economist at FS Investments. Again, speaking about rates, the 10-year Treasury, boy, it really gets your attention here. Up another basis point today. We're at 4.10%. The 2-year's at 3.98%, just about 4% on the 2-year. We haven't been there for a while. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul. David, Lisa. Hamas's deputy chief confirms its leader, Yahya Sinwar, was killed in Gaza. Sinwar was the chief architect of last year's murderous attack on Israel that sparked the current war. The U.S. hopes that ceasefire talks could get underway quickly. President Biden, while in Berlin, Germany today, says he spoke directly with the Israeli prime minister after Sinwar's death was confirmed.
I told the Prime Minister of Israel yesterday, let's also make this moment an opportunity to seek a path to peace.
Bloomberg's Dan Williams in Jerusalem reports Sinwar's death leaves Hamas with no clear successor.
If Hamas chooses a successor who's Gaza-based, that man's tenure is likely to be short-lived. He will be pursued and killed by Israel in short order, presumably, and he will be spending what remains of his life on the run. However, at the same time, by electing someone like Sinwar, who is Gaza-based, Hamas will be signaling to itself, to Palestinians, to the world at large, that it's still in the fight. It hasn't been defeated in Gaza yet.
Bloomberg's Dan Williams in Jerusalem. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump will both be scouring for votes in Michigan today as they try to lock down support in the key political battleground state. A hearing is scheduled for noon on Monday for the man who would have become the first person executed for a murder tied to shaken baby syndrome. The Texas Supreme Court halted last night's lethal injection for Robert Roberson, who was convicted of killing his 2-year-old daughter, Nikki, in 2002. Critics of his convictions say flawed science sent Roberson to death row. Texas Department of Criminal Justice spokesperson Amanda Hernandez.
I had the opportunity to go back there to speak with him, and he was shocked, to say the least. He praised God, and he thanked his supporters.
Roberson's lawyers argue new evidence suggests Nikki died of pneumonia made worse by medication. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. You know, the news. One of the news items that got my attention today was iPhone sales. iPhone 16 sales soared 20% in China debut as demand returns. I called this before because finally I upgraded my phone from the iPhone 11 to the iPhone 16.
How do you like it?
Pro. I
you
like
got the
it.
Pro. You've got the 3 cameras. How do
Yes,
you go
I got
Pro?
the 3. It's a camera that doubles as a phone sometimes.
Yes.
And, you know, an internet access point. But basically, it's all about the camera here today. No, but it was easy. And I got, like, for my iPhone 11, which was barely breathing, $1,000.
Incredible. No, I think like I saw Verizon has that. I think T-Mobile has
Yep.
that plan as well. And I'm waiting for this AI thing that's going to roll out with it. I guess that's the big.
I think that's a scam.
You think
quite
it's a
frankly.
scam?
I'm still
Okay.
calling it a scam. This whole but now this is also the same person who
Apple Intelligence.
who advised his good friend Lanny Baker. No, Lanny, don't become the internet analyst at Solomon Sotwani. You stick with the newspapers, my friend.
I want
Can you
the,
believe
I
I
want
gave
the
that
Paul
advice?
Sweeney book of advice. All of
Advice.
the chapter after
Lanny,
chapter of good advice.
fortunately, ignored me, became a great internet analyst, is now one of the leading internet executives out in Silicon Valley. So the newspaper business, not so much. So, yeah. So anyway, I upgraded. Apple, doing well. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Futures mixed, and this is after traders rolled back expectations of interest rate cuts following solid retail sales yesterday. Today, more data on tap. About 15 minutes from now, we'll get some data on housing starts. And more Fed speak, Christopher Waller, Neil Kashkari as well. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.5%, 102 points. Dow futures down about 0.1%, 52 points. S&P futures up about 0.2%, or 12 points. The 2-year yield at 3.98%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.11%, and that's up about 1 basis point. To currencies right now, we have the dollar weaker, Japanese yen stronger, we have euro stronger. British pound stronger. That's after retail sales there unexpectedly rose in September. Right now at 130.45 against the dollar. To earnings we go. American Express raised its outlook for earnings for 2024. Its outlook. Shares, though, down more than 2.5%. Maybe investors were expecting a little bit more. We go to Procter & Gamble. Their shares down about 1%. Quarterly sales slipped. Weakness. Areas like skin and baby care. But its results were in line with estimates. And I want to check in with ADRs from major Chinese companies. They're jumping. Rallies in Hong Kong and mainland Chinese markets. We have Alibaba up more than 2.5%. PDD up 3%. And JD.com up about 5%. For on-demand news, 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate it. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. We did have a sighting yesterday, right?
Yes, well,
Okay.
not of him himself, but what was on the table in front of him, and it looks like in
A
keeping
cigar,
with what you would think
cocktail,
Tom would
and
have
exactly
in Italy.
a life well lived by Tom Keene somewhere in Italy. So that's good stuff there. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. I want to get this in here because this is pretty cool. Today marks the launch of the Bloomberg Weekend Edition newsletter. Every Friday, we'll bring you a collection of ideas that explore the fascinating places where finance, life, and culture meet. Get the Weekend Edition newsletter on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg Business app.
I could see
More
Tom
good
reading
stuff.
that,
I could see him.
in
I
Italy
could see him
over
actually
the
kind of
weekend.
contributing to that. I'm
Yeah.
sitting here in a cafe in Rome, a cigar, adult
a
beverage.
variety of cocktails.
A variety of cocktails. Hey, when you're on vacation, have some fun here. Our next guest, we need to get right to it. Gautam Mukunda. He's a lecturer of management practice at the Yale School of Management. He's also the author of Picking Presidents. Gautam, thanks so much for joining us here on our studio. I don't think anybody knows how we're going to pick this president come 3 weeks' time. What's your view of this election, these campaigns, kind of where we are today?
Always a pleasure to be here. Anyone who tells you they know what's going to happen is immediately demonstrating that they do not know what is going to happen. Right. So when people say it's too close to call, that's basically true. I think the Harris campaign seems to feel that they'd rather be them than the other guy. Mm-hmm. I observe that the Trump campaign seems to feel that the Harris campaign is right because they're acting in a few ways that don't seem like someone who thinks that they can tip it. Trump has pulled out of 4 interviews, major interviews, CNBC, 60 Minutes in the last few days. That's kind of striking and surprising for 20-some days to go to an election. But the other thing, that the big change that has happened since Harris came in, and this is an incredibly static race since she came in, right? All these people, the polls are swinging. No, they're not. This is just stable. The big change is there's been a convergence in the swing states. When Biden was the candidate, he had a path through the Midwest, and that was it. What's happened since Harris is that Arizona, North Carolina, they've all kind of converged. And so you do have this odd prospect where what is objectively a very close race could become not that close in the Electoral College after Election Day, just because all the swing states correlate. And
So they correlate for whom?
That's what no one knows.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
All right. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing something there. Okay.
You bring up polling, and I wanted to ask you about this because it's something Paul and I have talked about off mic, and that is there are so many polls. We're getting so many of them. You look at them in complement. What do they tell you? How do you approach them? I know that there's so much skepticism about what they've said in the past, how they've been right and wrong. Here we have them at such a granular level. So much of what we know about these swing states comes from them, and we know kind of what issues are most important to voters. How much faith do you put into them, and how do you look at them kind of holistically?
Right. So the polling data in 2016 was actually pretty good. The estimate of the popular vote was only off by 1%. The polling data in 2020 was really bad. The estimate of the popular vote was off by 4%. What was bad in 2016 was the swing state polling, right, which is why the estimates as to who won were so off. But caveat to that, right now, the thing that makes me really question the polls right now is how consistent they are.
Interesting.
Just normal, right? Polling are statistical instruments. Normal statistical variation, you should see numbers that jump around all the time, right? If Harris is legitimately up 2%, let's say she actually is up 2%, you should expect to see a fair number of polls where Donald Trump is up 1%. Mm-hmm. We are not seeing that. We are just seeing poll after poll after poll coming in with roughly the same data over and over again. To me, that suggests that the polling companies are hurting. Nobody wants to
explain that. What does that mean when there's hurting in polls?
There's a lot of judgment involved in how you weight different populations, how you assess, right? Are you going to use recollections of how people voted 4 years ago? For example, a lot of polls will ask, how did you vote 4 years ago, and use that to assess, to reweight their sample. The problem is people don't actually remember that as well as you think. If you ask people a few years after the race, who did you vote for? On average, more than 60% will say they voted for the winning side.
You blocked it out.
This seems unlikely, yeah. So when you add in, there are enough subjective factors into polling that it just seems to me like the polling companies might be thinking that nobody wants to be embarrassingly wrong, and they're converging on a number which, look, it might be right, but it's not normal for it to be this consistent across all the polls.
One of the other issues that I think a lot of people are concerned about is we may not know the evening of Election Day who the winner is. We may not know the next day or the day after, and then, oh boy, it could get messy, and it's 2000 all over again, but on steroids. What is the risk there of that type of scenario developing?
Quite significant, but it also depends on your definition of no. Okay. We did not get the networks, who somehow we have outsourced the job of calling who wins an election to. We did not get the networks to declare until several days after the election in 2020. But by 11 p.m. on election night, I was texting people saying 100% certainty Biden is going to win. Like, I am, I will bet my condo right now, any odds you want, Biden's going to win. So we knew, right? We just didn't officially know.
Okay.
This election, I suspect, will look more like 2020, where we'll have a really good sense, just because I expect the swing states to correlate. I expect, where what we'd have to say is, well, there'd have to be flips in like multiple states to reverse it. That doesn't seem likely to me. But that doesn't mean that we'll have official knowledge, because if Harris loses, she's going to admit it. She's going to say I lost, and that'll be the end of it. But if Trump loses, I don't think there's any chance that he'll do anything other than claim it was stolen. He'll do legally, he'll do that, and then we're off to the races. We really don't have a great sense of what's going to happen after that.
We have been through this week when both of these candidates have made overtures to populations you'd think would not be natural supporters of them. So for Kamala Harris, it's Republican women voters in Pennsylvania. For Donald Trump, it was going down to Miami to speak to this audience of Latino voters from Univision studios there. I'm curious sort of what you make of that outreach that they're doing. And so when you look at the game plan going from here to November the 5th, should the game be to reach out to those undecided voters, how few of them there may be, or is it simply to focus on the get out the vote effort to make sure that those are committed to these candidates make it to the polls on Election Day?
True undecided voters, last time I was on, I said 3%. True undecided voters is probably under 2% at this point. We're talking about really tiny margins. A lot of what people are looking at, what seems like going to undecided voters, I don't think it's actually about that, right? If in North Carolina, Harris is going to win the cities and lose the rural areas. But if she cuts into Trump's margin in the rural areas, the cities will take her. Right? In Pennsylvania, it's the same thing. So what we're seeing is what might code as undecided voters actually, to me, looks a lot more like we're trying to do essentially a covert turnout, get out the vote margin in areas where we're going to get blown out. We just don't want to get blown out by that much.
So it is, I've heard from folks, a get out the vote kind of election. Does one side or the other have an advantage in that?
So from people on the ground in Pennsylvania that I talk to, that's where I've been focusing my attention. It certainly feels like the Harris operation is a lot more sophisticated. What we've seen is the Trump campaign has essentially outsourced their get out the vote operation essentially to Elon Musk and his super PAC. Obviously, that's lavishly funded. He put $75 million in just recently. But we don't see them on the ground. I'm not totally certain where this money is going, frankly. The question is the Trump people have a theory of victory. And it is not a dumb theory of victory, right? This is not the amateur hour campaign that we saw 2016 and 20. These people know what they're doing.
Okay.
And the theory of victory is that they can get people who do not normally vote to vote for Donald Trump. If they're right about that, then they win this election.
Okay. Gautam, thank you so much
back.
for joining us
Great
yet
to
again.
speak with you.
Yep,
Yeah,
great stuff. Gautam Mukunda, he's a lecturer of the management practice. Now, it's at the Yale School of Management. Now, he walks into Gautam with a very nice three-piece suit, but he's got this pin on his lapel. It's got the American flag, also the flag of Harvard. And you walk into your classroom at Yale with that?
The only time in my life I ever wear Harvard gear is when I'm on Yale.
Okay, very good. All right, good stuff there. We'd like to see that rivalry still in full tact. That's good to see. We'll have more coming up. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've still got red and green on the screen. NASDAQ futures leading the charge right now, up about 0.5%, 102 points. We have S&P futures up 0.2%, 11 points. Dow futures, though, down 0.1% or 71 points. We have more economic data coming in just a few moments. Right now, we'll start with housing starts. This is for September. The survey was for 1.35 million. It came in at 1.35 million, exactly. So just about on par with estimates. Now, I'm going to building permits, 1.46 million. That was the estimate, coming in at 1.42 million. You can see the difference there. Housing starts just being revised up. The prior now at 1.36 million. All right, from that we go to the bond market. We have the 2-year yield 3.96%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year 4.09%, and that is little changed as well. Few companies making news. We'll start with Samsung Electronics. Reuters saying it reportedly postponed taking deliveries of ASML chip-making equipment for its upcoming factory in Texas. And the Information reporting the U.S. investigating whether Taiwan Semiconductor, whether it's been making AI or smartphone chips for Huawei, and that's in breach of export rules. TSM ADR is down about 0.5%. And sources say Tesla's full self-driving system facing a federal investigation into whether it's defective. 4 crashes, one of which was fatal. Shares down about 0.5%. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa, you're so into this housing data. explain this to me. I live about 6 blocks from the beach, and between me and the beach, there's probably 10 houses that in the last 6 months have been bought, knocked down, and now are being rebuilt into these bigger, better super houses and whatever. Where does that get in the data? I don't know where that goes in the data. I mean, is that a new housing start? Is that a permit? Is that? I mean, but that's
true because it's an old that turns into a new.
I don't know.
It's an old piece of property.
Net neutral.
Net neutral. Yeah, I guess.
Neutral.
Exactly. All right, let's do a little bit billboard. Economic indicators are brought to you by Commonwealth, supporting more than 2,000 independent financial advisors with a 2-to-1 advisor to staff ratio. Small firm attentives, big advisor impact. Go to commonwealth.com to learn about our consultative support and technology. Let's check in with on these markets here with Anna Rothbun. She's the CIO of CBIZ Investment Advisors. Anna, what do you make of some of this economic data here? It seems to be coming in, whether it was the retail sales yesterday or some of the other growth dynamics here. Inflation seems to be in check. Markets seem to be saying, okay, maybe the Fed doesn't need to cut, and I'm okay with that. How do you think about some of the economic data and what it means for markets going forward?
Good morning. Well, the economy doesn't move in a straight line. I mean, so you're going to see upside, you're going to see downside, both in terms of surprises. And it doesn't surprise me that some of the softness that we've seen in the market, as well as the economy, you know what, it's correcting itself a little bit. So it's going to be up and down, up and down. The question is for not the short-term trajectory, but the intermediate trajectory. Where is it ultimately headed? It can go up and down, but it's got to have a direction. And that's the biggest piece of the puzzle that we can't seem to figure out as an investing community.
Anna, we've had a parade of, I'll call them soft landing true believers, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like you are not you are not one of them. You are a skeptic. You still think there is some possibility here that the plane does not land easily.
Yeah. So, I have my own issues about the term soft landing because it sounds like there's a finish line and then we get to all call a victory when truth is the economy continues to move on, right? So it feels like a soft landing now. All this good economic data, it feels really great. But the question is what happens after that, right? And so what we're looking for at CBIZ is really where is the sort of the black swan event? Where are the risks that we cannot see? And there are plenty of them. Right. So we've seemed to have forgotten that we were talking about softness in labor market and softness in consumers that we've been getting from companies like Dollar Tree, Walmart, Target. They're still there. The question is, will it spread? Will it have contagious effects? And so these are sort of the S-curve type of risks that we're looking at. And frankly, geopolitics also falls into that category as well. Will the escalation have will it escalate quickly? Will it accelerate? And these are the things that we can't see from the corner that can happen pretty quickly. And those are the things that we are worried about.
So, Anna, I know from chatting with you in the past, you guys at CBIZ have a diversified view to this market here. Fixed income here, I'm sitting on a 2-year treasury darn near 4% here. Is that okay, or should I be taking some credit risk with my fixed income allocation?
Yeah, so 10-year has surprised all of us, but maybe you shouldn't have, because look, when the Fed cuts by 50 basis points, which was frankly more than what I expected and a lot of people expected, markets liked it, but the liking it makes you think, oh, maybe growth will be better. Maybe inflation might have an upside because growth might be better. And that pulls the longer yields on the curve up. And so we've kept the duration shorter. Now, on the credit side, look, credit spreads are really tight. The market is telling us there's plenty of liquidity for those who can get it, right? Not everyone can have access to that liquidity. And so from a credit standpoint, if you're doing enough research on the credit side, I think it's fine. On the high yield side, which we really like because look, 7.2%-ish on income, it's pretty hard to pass up, right? But we also understand that in the spirit of that S curve, those spreads can widen pretty quickly. So the allocation itself for us is on the lower side, but we are still clipping that coupon because it is, I mean, I've used this term before, it's quite yummy.
I like that.
And I imagine that you're getting calls from clients who are intimidated by all the risks that are out there, and it seems like we're getting kind of news of more uncertainty in the Middle East. We've got the election. There's this Fed meeting. All of that. How are you processing that? And Paul very rightly has been pointing to this record that we've seen gold hit in recent hours. What does that tell you just about kind of general appetite for risk, and what's your counsel to your clients about how they should be thinking about some of these kind of larger geopolitical risks?
Yeah, so when times are really good, clients don't like diversified portfolios. They kind of wonder, why are you not in all of the Max 7s, right? So this is the time to appreciate diversified portfolios and taking a longer term view, because when you're diversified, you're not going to be putting all your eggs in one basket, right? And there are these risks that are out there, and the gold market is telling us something about the geopolitics. Actually, money market's also telling us something, right? And part of it is the high yield that they're giving us, but a part of it is, why aren't they going to chase the Max 7 stocks? So I think there's enough nervousness out there that the diversified portfolio narrative is actually pretty effective. That's not always the case.
Anna, do alternative investments factor into your portfolio? It's just been, we've all grown up with private equity and maybe hedge funds, but now private credit has become such a big collector of assets. How do alternatives factor into your portfolio?
Yeah, so we do have a lot of clients who do invest in alternative portfolios. Now, earlier in this segment, you called me a skeptic, and I am a skeptic here too. I see the opportunity, right? So if liquidity isn't coming from traditional sources like banks and issuance of bonds, for a lot of people, it's coming from the private side, both in terms of equity as well as credit. But being a skeptic, you have to be very selective. Anytime capital is chasing some kind of opportunity, you have to take a few steps back and be skeptical about it. So we focus on selection of managers, selection of opportunities, but I think in the intermediate to longer term, there's going to be some kind of convergence between the public and private markets, where these investments that have traditionally not been available to everyone can actually be available to more individuals as well as institutions.
When you look at how much cash is still on the side, trillions of dollars in cash still on the sidelines here, what's the catalyst going to be, as you see it, that gets people who have been trepidatious, shall we say, for the last little while to re-engage with the market? How do you make the case that they should be deploying that capital elsewhere?
You know, as long as money market is giving us, 4% up, 4 to 5%, I don't think that money's going to move. It's too comfortable. And we have anchoring bias here of, it's not too long ago they were giving us near 0%, right? So I think a lot of people are still going to be enjoying that income. And the other is, there's no friction in the money market when you're holding it. You can take it out whenever you want. You don't need to call your advisor to sell anything. I think there's that ease of transaction there that is comfortable for a lot of people. For that money to move out, the Fed will have to cut significantly, where the investors may think, hey, this is no longer, attractive anymore for us. We need to figure out how to deploy this money. And until then, I think you're going to see high balances on the money market side.
Anna, we're just getting into the teeth of the earnings season here. We've heard from a lot of the big financial institutions, and quite frankly, put up some really good numbers. What have you seen to date in earnings, and what do you think this market needs to see this earnings cycle?
We need to see broadening out. And I think the bank earnings are sort of a canary in the coal mine for broadening out. We need to see the Fed cut in November and in December for that M&A activity to pick up, for us to have more faith in the banking sector, because frankly, banks are they have tentacles everywhere, right? They represent the economy. It's sort of a microcosm and really a canary in the coal mine as well. So I think we need to see the Fed cut, and I think that will lift sentiment. And frankly, we need to see the earnings broaden out, which I think we will see, especially because we're measuring it year over year, right? So I think the sentiment is pretty good, and I think fundamentals can continue as long as the Fed cuts.
Anna, thanks so much for joining us. As always, appreciate getting your thoughts and perspective. Anna Rhame, she's the CIO at CBiz Investment Advisors in Cleveland, Ohio. That's twice today we've mentioned Cleveland, Ohio. How about that? With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, Lisa. President Biden reacted to the death of Yahya Sinwar, said to be the architect behind the October 7th, 2023 attack while in Berlin, Germany today. Biden saw the elimination of the leader as an opportunity to resume ceasefire talks and called Israel's actions justified.
The death of the leader of Hamas represents a moment of justice. He had the blood of Americans and Israelis, Palestinians, and Germans, and so many others on his hand.
We get more with Bloomberg Middle East correspondent Jumana Bersetchi in Dubai.
It's pretty apparent that in the last 24 hours, both the President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris have seen this as a window of opportunity to push forward with those ceasefire discussions. The Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, is going to be returning to the region in the next 4 to 5 days. Once more, this would be his 11th trip since October 7 to push forward with those negotiations.
Bloomberg's Jumana Bersetchi. Former President Trump spoke at the New York Archdiocese annual Al Smith Memorial Foundation dinner last night. The dinner is a presidential election tradition. Vice President Harris, while on video, did not attend in person, which Trump seized on.
I must say I was shocked when I heard that Kamala was skipping the Al Smith dinner. I'd really hoped that she would come because we can't get enough of hearing her beautiful laugh. She laughs like crazy.
Kamala Harris decided to make multiple stops across the state of Wisconsin Thursday. In Green Bay, she laid out her economic policies, talked about abortion and reproductive freedoms, and contrasted her vision with that of former President Trump.
We know this election is about two very different visions for our country. One that is focused on the past, his, and ours that is focused on the future.
Harris and Trump will campaign in Michigan today. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David, you're a native of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I'm still kind of seeing some extraordinary reporting about the total devastation in the western part of the state. It feels like it's not going to be weeks or months to rebuild. It might be years to rebuild some of the, I mean, I'm talking the infrastructure in terms of just simple roads and transportation communication.
Yeah, I've been trying to keep up with what's been happening there, just reading the local papers. And you're right. I think we're getting these kind of harrowing stories of how people survived what happened there just a couple of weeks ago. But I spoke with somebody, a friend of mine out there, who said that she had to kind of move temporarily to Durham because they're not going to have running water. They're not going to have running water for many months there. So it's kind of the knock-on effects of what we saw, the dramatic footage, of course, and all of those stories of people losing their homes. But now sort of how they rebuild the infrastructure that you're talking about, Paul, is going to be a huge issue going forward. Yeah, and we were just, Alex and I were at a Wells Fargo event. Wells Fargo, obviously a big player in a big presence in the state of North Carolina. And they're sending lots of resources out to that part of the state, including people in terms of aid and so on. So we'll keep an eye on that. Can't forget about Western North Carolina. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Recovery in big tech looks kind of set to extend. That's thanks to results from Netflix. Shares right now up about 6%. Let's get to NASDAQ futures up about 0.5%, 117 points. Dow futures down 0.1%, 62 points. S&P futures up 0.2%, or 14 points. We have the 2-year yield 3.96%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.08%, and that is little change. More economic data. New home construction fell 0.5% in September after rising 7.8% the prior month. Building permits month over month, well, that fell more than expected, down 2.9%. Warren Buffett unloading more shares of Bank of America. The lender repurchased enough of its own shares to bring its stake back above 10%. New York Community Bank's Flagstar Bank eliminating 700 jobs, or 8% of its workforce. And finally, I thought this was interesting. A 237-year-old copy of the U.S. Constitution, well, it sold for big money, $9 million at auction. Where did they find it? The AP says it's in a historic building in North Carolina in an old filing cabinet. Check all the drawers. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. Let's talk M&A. We've heard the big banks reporting, JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, talking about strong advisory business for them this year. Very strong capital markets business across the boards in terms of new issuance and sales and trading. But let's get a sense of this M&A business for the remainder of this year and kind of what the big banks are looking for next year. Carole Streicher joins us. She is America's Regional Head of Deal Advisory for KPMG. Carole, thanks so much for joining us here. Talk to us about M&A. In 2024, how's the business been for Global Wall Street? And then we'll talk about next year. But how's 24 been?
Yeah, 24 has been a better year than 23. We are seeing deals increasing in 24. We've seen them increasing. But, 23 was a really low year. So it's not a robust 24. If you kind of look at the last year that deal makers kind of look as the last year of normality was 2019. And 24 is still lower than 2019. So better than last year, but still not a super robust deal market.
I'll take the follow-up, picking up on what Paul said. So looking ahead to 2025, what engenders optimism in bankers and lawyers, in your clients, about how the market is going to look?
Yeah, I think the sentiment around from everyone we're talking to, I was with 150 deal makers yesterday talking about the M&A market. And the sentiment everywhere is that 25 is going to be a more robust year. And 26, we're talking about kind of the next couple years. And, there's a few things that we're looking at that are going to be, things that are headwinds and tailwinds in the deal market. Some of the things that are positive is interest rates, as you guys know, are coming down, and that is an important factor in deal making. The election hopefully will be behind us, and some certainty will be back into the market. And I think that will be something that will also help with the M&A market. I think this next quarter, the remainder of the year is still going to be on the lighter side given the election. I think what deal makers want is that certainty. And so those are some of the things that we're looking at for 25.
Private equity, where are they in this deal market here? I know there's just tons of capital on the sidelines for these private equity folks. They're always in fundraising mode, it seems, but we haven't seen them maybe back in the market in the size maybe some of the bankers would like to see. Where is the private equity sector as a driver?
Yeah, you're exactly right. There is so much dry powder out there. The private equity firms need to put that money to work. And I think the thing that is most impactful that we see from a private equity perspective is the interest rates coming down. So especially those LBOs, those leveraged buyouts, interest rates needing to come down to be able to make those deals a little less costly for that cost of capital. And so when we did our M&A survey of deal makers, it came out very clear that in the first half of 25, PE is more bullish around having a more robust M&A market, driven again by those interest rates. It was interesting, our corporate clients, in contrast, said that they thought it'd be the latter part of 25 where they'd be a more robust deal market for them.
I wanted to ask you about regulatory clarity. So you mentioned the election. It's this obstacle, I think, for a lot of CEOs as they look at the prospects of M&A. And I wonder, as you listen to these two candidates on the campaign trail, how thorough their policy on regulation seems to be. So obviously we've lived through a Trump administration before, and even though Vice President Harris has tried to draw a distinction between what her presidency would be like compared to the one that she's in now with under Joe Biden, do we have a good sense of what the regulatory environment would be like under each of these candidates?
Yeah, so here's what I would say is that there has been increased scrutiny from an antitrust perspective for several years. It's not just been within this administration. And I think that as we think about the future and what we're hearing from our clients is that scrutiny is not going to go away in the next term of whoever's in office. I think they're working closely with their lawyers to assess what scrutiny might be there for that in particular deal and working closely on that. And so that's what I would, there's not a clear one path leads one way and one path leads another way.
Carole, if I want to go out and buy a company, who's going to lend me the money? Because I'm going to want to use some leverage to leverage my equity returns. Are the banks still there, or where am I going to get the money?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. You can only get deals done if you've got the money. So a couple things. So clearly, for those that are using debt to finance the acquisition, the banks are open. If you rewind, around 6-8 months ago, that was not the case. And so there is money out there. It's a little bit more expensive than it was, several years ago. But it is available. And there's also the opportunity for some of our corporates to be using their stock, as well as they're flush with cash on their balance sheets as well.
Let me just ask you, you talked about the Federal Reserve and the path of rate cutting, and I'm curious just sort of how catalytic that's going to be. So we've joked about refinancing mortgages and the housing market and all of that. In this space in particular, how much of a catalyst, how much did the dam break when you saw the Fed cut by 50 basis points, just kind of when we saw the start of what we anticipate to be a cycle of rate cuts?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when that rate cut hit, it's also all the election stuff is going on. And so it's hard to bifurcate, if you will, what's happening with the different things, interest rates and election. Because oftentimes in election years, we see a depressed M&A market. That's what we've seen for the last several election years. All that being said, your question is around those interest rates, and it is a catalyst for M&A. We haven't seen the dam break, if you will. We at KPMG, our chief economist, is predicting another 50 basis points drop, 25 basis points in November, 25 in December. And when we look at our M&A survey, what our deal makers said is that a 50 basis point drop would spur them into doing activity like it was in 2021. Now, this is deal makers who that's what they do for a living, right? But
they're itching to get back in the game. Yes,
absolutely. I always say it's like a kid asking a kid in a candy store if they want a candy. Of course, they're going to say yes. Let's go.
Carole, are there any sectors, or what are the sectors that you think might be, or your clients think might be active over the next year or two?
Well, what we've seen so far is that TMT has been a sector that's been extremely busy. On the contrast, healthcare has been significantly down. We're starting to see that pop up a little bit from a sector perspective. But, of course, I think there's things around our energy needs, clean energy is another one where we're seeing some uptick in the deal market as well.
Carole, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate getting your perspective on the global M&A business. 24 better than 23. Expectations 25 might be pretty solid as well. That's certainly what we hear from the big investment banks that have reported their earnings so far. Carole Streicher, she's America's Regional Head of Deal Advisory at KPMG. Her clients are the big M&A bankers around global Wall Street, so it's good to check in with Carole and get a sense of kind of where her clients think this business may go. So we've got a lot coming up here. Coming up in just a moment, we're going to check in with Joe Matthew, host of Bloomberg's Balance of Power, to get the latest on this race. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning. Oh, this is Cher. She's also going into the Hall of Fame in Cleveland. I see the theme here, Ken. Nicely done.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in a fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to get the latest from D.C. 18 days to the election.
Yes.
All I do is say, Joe Matthew, what's going on? How do we think about this? He'll be coming on in just a moment. Margaret Brennan, host of CBS's Face the Nation, she's going to give us a lowdown and a preview of what we can expect this Sunday morning on CBS Network, Face the Nation, also on CBS, on Bloomberg Radio in the afternoon. Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO of Quill Intelligence, one of the smartest voices you're going to hear on this Federal Reserve and where they're going to take rates. So all that is coming up in this hour. Right now, let's kick it all off with Lisa Mateo in a Bloomberg Business Flash.
You got it. We've got futures mixed after Wall Street dialed back those Fed cut bets following strong economic data. Right now, we have NASDAQ futures up about 0.5%, 112 points. Dow futures down 0.2%, 96 points. S&P futures up 0.2%, or 13 points. The 2-year yield 3.95%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.08%, and that is little changed. Over to commodities. Gold hit a new record. We'll check in with spot gold right now at $2,711 an ounce. COMEX gold, $2,726 an ounce. We have Brent crude, $74 a barrel. WTI crude down about 0.5% at $70 a barrel. Shares of CVS Health now down 8%. A preliminary profit miss, but the big news, it named longtime executive David Joyner its new chief, replacing Karen Lynch. He sent out a memo to employees today. Bloomberg got their hands on it. He highlighted the challenges to the industry, but he also said they need to come together as a company, asking for their help. Over to Netflix, those shares up 6%, adding more than 5 million customers in the third quarter, topping expectations on every major financial metric. And finally, Apple's iPhone 16 sales in China up 20% in their first 3 weeks compared to last year's model. That's according to a report from Counterpoint Research. Those shares up now more than 1.5%. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene here this morning. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. So you can go out and find the internet somewhere. Go to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast, and that's where you'll find us. And today marks the launch of the Bloomberg Weekend Edition newsletter. Every Friday, we'll bring you a collection of ideas that explore the fascinating places where finance, life, and culture meet. Get the Weekend Edition newsletter on Bloomberg.com and on the Bloomberg Business app. You know, if you want content, which is what the kids call it today.
They do, yes.
Business, economics, finance, the markets. I mean, we got 2,700 journalists and
all over the
research
world.
analysts all over the world.
Yeah.
I mean, they're cranking this stuff out every day. And I guess whether it's podcasts, newsletters, there's so many different ways for Bloomberg to package it. So no matter how you want to get this stuff, Bloomberg figures out a way to get it to you. I don't know who these people are.
My understanding is, as I've watched this all come together, is since there's a different sensibility for the weekend, so this will be a great newsletter for you on a Saturday morning, Sunday morning, to sort of sit down, process what's happened over the course of the last week, and look ahead to the next one. So I'm eager to see it.
Yep, we got some smart people doing some good stuff here. Speaking of one of them, Joe Matthew, he's down in Washington, D.C. That's his fate in life, to be in Washington. God bless him. But fortunately for us, he follows everything coming out of Washington, D.C. with the Balance of Power program that comes at you noon Wall Street time every day. Joe, one of the discussion points on this election is the get out the vote story. Can you talk to us about, is this cycle any different than any other cycle? And if so, does it favor one candidate or the other?
Important questions that no one can really answer until we're looking at this in the rearview mirror. The fact of the matter is this race is so close right now that it is all about turnout and get out the vote. I mean, that's the case in every election. Maybe it is more severe this time because I kind of have a hard time buying that there's these undecided voters that they just don't know the difference between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, and how will they decide in the next 2.5 weeks? Not really likely. There's like 3 people out there who haven't decided yet. So the question becomes, who actually gets off the couch to vote? I think it was Kevin Walling who said last night, this isn't a debate between the candidates. This is a debate between each candidate and the couch. It's not just young people. It's a lot of different constituencies who may not be as motivated as they were 4 years ago when we were in the throes of a pandemic and life was really different. So, look, I think in a lot of ways, this comes down to who scores last and who motivates people to get off the couch on November 5th. And by the way, it's not just November 5th. We're already voting. Early voting is underway in some important places. It starts tomorrow in Detroit, which is exactly why both candidates will be there.
You know, dovetail what you're talking about with the closing arguments that these candidates are going to make. And we spoke with you earlier this morning. Between then and now, Donald Trump paid a visit to his friends at the Fox News Network and sat on the famed curvy couch for a conversation there. And we got kind of a variation on a theme that we've heard from his rallies, and to an extent what we heard when he sat down with our colleague John Micklethwaite in Chicago at the Economic Club of Chicago. What is the closing argument for each of these candidates? Is it as simple, Joe, as you're alluding to, as just get to the polls, just tender your ballot into at the polling place or to the mailbox, or is there more to it than that? Are we going to see kind of a refined message here in these last few weeks?
You're asking the right question. That I'm asking this too because I think it's still being refined. I mean, Donald Trump this week was still rolling out new policy proposals with 3 weeks to go. Kamala Harris, I suspect, could be as well. She is certainly helping to refine some of them. In the interview that she did with Bret Baier, made a little bit of news. Look, they're kind of trying things out, and I suspect that they're doing a lot of focus grouping and internal polling, whether it's Donald Trump as a threat to democracy, whether it's I can prevent price gouging. I'm not really sure how to answer that question, which is why this is a fascinating moment. I will tell you that they're both pulling out the big guns, though. Next week will be the Obamas, not just Barack Obama, but I think who we can argue is really the most powerful surrogate that Kamala Harris has, and that's not Oprah Winfrey. I mean Michelle Obama. A week from tomorrow, they're going to be on stage together for the first time in this campaign. That could be a motivating factor for some people. You know, it's in some cases about bringing back the old times, whether you're Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, bringing it back to the Obama times. In the case of Trump, back to the first term. So it's a good question. Donald Trump seems to be casting about, kind of freelancing a little bit. Do you know he's going to be at McDonald's on Sunday? Did you guys hear about this? He's going to, quote,
I saw the
work
headline.
for fryers
yes.
at a Bucks County McDonald's on Sunday because he just doesn't believe Kamala Harris ever worked at a McDonald's. And I'm deeply curious, does he put the paper hat on or the apron?
He's got to
We see
protect
him
that
reaching out the window at the drive-thru.
He's not going to chance it with that hot oil.
I don't know.
Hey, Joe, what's the thinking in D.C. these days about everybody else but the presidential election, all the down ballot stuff? Is there any sense of how that's breaking?
There's a conventional wisdom, if you're asking big picture here right now in Washington, that the Senate turns Republican and the House turns Democrat, that they basically just switch places. And the reason why is because Democrats are facing a really tough map when it comes to the Senate this year. We're looking at states like Ohio, like Montana, across the country here. Pennsylvania is another big one. It's a lot of these same swing states that in many cases have very important Senate races with Democratic incumbents in danger. The House is kind of a different animal. And of course, we're talking about like a 4-seat majority for Republicans there. We're going to be looking very closely at the New York delegation. But a lot of this is going to have to do with coattails, guys. When you look at these states, whomever wins the president will likely be followed by either corresponding D's or R's. I'm having a hard time buying the whole ticket splitting idea. You know, that Bob Casey wins Pennsylvania and so does Donald Trump at the same time. It's kind of an interesting push and pull when we look at past elections that may not really have a lot to do with what we're seeing now.
Picking up on that, Joe, I wanted to ask you about what Donald Trump is doing to help those candidates down ballot. So yes, there's the name recognition that you could hitch your star to his wagon or whatever the torture metaphor may be. But I go back to that very bizarre rally that former President Trump had earlier this week, where he cut the question short and danced to music for 45 minutes. There was Kristi Noem, the governor of South Dakota, on stage with him. And, you know, she is a surrogate of his, yes, but I think of others like her who tag along with him as he visits certain states, their states, and kind of want the imprimatur of the former president, want him to support them publicly and tell voters to vote for them as well. Is that happening? Does he take much of an interest, as you observe it, in those candidates down ballot, or is he content just to let them kind of latch on to him and do as they can?
You know, he does the list. You've been to these rallies. He'll call out. Sometimes he gets their name wrong. Sometimes you can tell he knows them and is friends with them. It's typically not about the candidate, though. When Donald Trump was in Pennsylvania about a week ago, he called Dave McCormick up on stage. He says, talk fast because nobody cares about you. Wants to hear from you right now.
Yes.
I mean, imagine following that act. And for Christine, oh my God, to have to think that she stood there for 40 minutes while we're doing the Village People and Sinead O'Connor. It's a Trump rally. This is why people go to them. You never quite know what you're going to get.
All right, Joe, thank you very much for joining us. Again, really appreciate getting the update there on this situation that's changing day by day for sure as we ramp up to this election. Joe Matthew, he's the host of Bloomberg's A Balance of Power with our news in New York City. Here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul. David, Lisa, there is hope ceasefire talks could get underway soon now that Israel killed Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas and the mastermind of the October 7th attacks. Today, a top Hamas political official confirmed Sinwar's death. But Bloomberg Middle East correspondent Jumana Basechi in Dubai says there are still many questions that need answers.
The Israeli Prime Minister has clearly articulated that the war in Gaza is not going to stop until Hamas fully lay down their arms. And the question from here onwards is whether Hamas are under so much duress now that they feel that they have no option but to lay down their arms and pave the way for a new type of governance in Gaza.
Bloomberg's Jumana Basechi. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump will campaign in Michigan today. Harris starts in Grand Rapids before holding events in Lansing and Oakland County, northwest of Detroit. Trump has his own event in Oakland County in the afternoon before holding a rally in Detroit in the evening. The Texas Supreme Court has halted the scheduled execution of a man who would have become the first person in the U.S. put to death for a murder conviction tied to a diagnosis of shaken baby syndrome. Last night's ruling to spare for now the life of Robert Robertson capped a flurry of last-ditch legal maneuvers and weeks of public pressure from both Republican and Democratic lawmakers who say he is innocent and was convicted based on flawed evidence. Robertson was convicted of killing his 2-year-old daughter in 2002. Texas State Representative John Busey praised the decision.
For 22 years, this man has been held in prison on death row, and we're hoping that finally, with this ruling today, with the state and the Supreme Court's decision, that the Texas House will be able to help bring to light the truth in this case. We believe this to be an innocent man where the facts have not come out, and we're hoping this hearing will give that opportunity for the people of Texas to finally hear the facts here.
A hearing is scheduled for noon Monday. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Paul, David, Lisa.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you so much. We appreciate that. All right, for our ACC basketball fans out there, which we've got 2 in this studio, and maybe even more. I don't know where the Detroit natives go these days.
The ACC is the whole country now.
The whole country now. You're exactly right. Virginia basketball coach Tony Bennett never chased the spotlight. That included with his stunning and abrupt decision to retire, effective immediately, announced on the eve of the start of the season. I saw this news yesterday, David. It really shocked me because he's a great coach. B, it's a great university and a great program. And C, he wins there.
And
so
he was locked in. I think he was supposed to be there through 2030, and he's not an old man. Forgive me for. I mean, he's 55 years old, which is young for ACC coaches, and really he's built up a very strong program in Charlottesville.
It's just been extraordinary. So again, folks of college basketball and folks of ACC basketball is really kind of big news. We're he's going to hold a press conference today at 11 a.m. Eastern time, so maybe we'll get the reasons as to the why here. Some people are speculating that the game's changed with all the money coming in through the NIL and the transfer portals and all that kind of stuff, and it's chased away the Jay Wrights and the Coach K's of the world, and maybe it's having an impact on that. So we'll follow up on that story. Again, little ACC hoops as we get ready for the season.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Futures Report brought to you by IBKR. With Interactive Brokers Forecast Trader, you can trade your views on the 2024 elections. Just answer yes or no. Visit IBKR.com/forecast and get started today. All right, NASDAQ futures, they're getting started basking in the Netflix glow. Right now, NASDAQ futures up 0.6%, 135 points. S&P futures up 0.2%, 17 points. We have Dow futures down 0.1% or 79 points. The two-year yield, 3.96%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.08%, and that is little change. To currencies, the dollar weaker, Japanese yen stronger, euro stronger, British pound stronger. In fact, British retail sales unexpectedly rose in September, so that's helping out. We have Bitcoin up 1% at around 67,000. To earnings we go. American Express raised its earnings outlook for 2024, but shares, they're lower, down 3%. We were trying to figure out why. I've been doing some digging. Here's the reason. We're now learning it posted an increase in provisions for credit losses because of write-offs. Those rose more than analysts expected. Expenses also rose on top of that, too. So there you go. Procter & Gamble, they are down more than 2%. Quarterly sales slipped with weakness in areas like skin and baby care, but its results were still in line with estimates. And finally, Chinese battery manufacturer CATL reported net income for the third quarter, missed estimates. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa. Thank you so much. We appreciate that, Lisa Mateo, with our flash there. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. I want to get right to our next guest, Margaret Brennan. She is the host of Face the Nation Sunday mornings on the CBS television network, Sunday afternoons on Bloomberg Radio. Margaret, there's a whole host of things we can talk about. We have to lead with the news out of Charlottesville. Virginia basketball coach Tony Bennett stepping down as a proud UVA alum with the best sources around the planet. Do you have any idea what's going on there?
Oh, wow. No, I don't. My head has been in a very different place. I did see that headline, but no, I've been in the Middle East and U.S. politics. Sorry.
I know. Well, it's big news for ACC basketball fans here, so we'll get a press conference at 11 a.m. Eastern time. Maybe we'll learn some more about there. So, Margaret, Face the Nation this Sunday, as you mentioned, there are so many ways to go. Domestic politics, geopolitical issues out there in the Middle East and Ukraine. Where do you guys start on Face the Nation, CBS television?
Well, we have a show where we want to get down to the thing I've heard so much about from people, which is their concern about when we'll know the election results, how litigated they'll be, how quickly the states will tally them. So the best way we could think of to get those answers in most concrete form was to turn to the secretaries of state themselves. Those secretaries of state have to administer the election. Remember, it's the state, not the federal government, that does that for presidential races. So we've got Brad Raffensperger of Georgia, swing state. We also have from Michigan, Jocelyn Benson, the Secretary of State there. We want to understand what we're about to go through because all of the polling to date, including from CBS, shows this is a neck-and-neck race that could go either way.
Margaret, you pulled double duty at CBS, so you're the moderator of Face the Nation, of course, but the chief foreign affairs correspondent as well. And you mentioned you've been focusing a lot on the Middle East. So just give us your perspective on the news out of the region yesterday and this kind of roiling conversation about where Israel's war goes from here. We've heard from the Prime Minister. We know that the Secretary of State, U.S. Secretary of State, is headed to Israel to convey what the Biden administration thinks Israel's approach should be in the aftermath of the killing of Yahya Sinwar. Where do you see that conversation going? We've noted, of course, that the U.S.'s counsel in recent weeks has not been taken by the Israeli government. Sort of, how do you see that unfolding?
That's right. The politically embattled Israeli prime minister has balanced a lot of competing interests in his domestic political front, while he's also looking at multiple geopolitical challenges, whether it's from Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, Iran itself as a state. But the bottom line is what just happened, taking Yahya Sinwar, the military commander on the ground inside of Gaza, the architect of October 7th, who has led this, campaign that really upended the regional politics. and is now also was the political leader. Taking him off the battlefield is significant. It's the equivalent of Israel's Osama bin Laden. The question is what opportunity comes out of this. The Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, goes to the region next week, and President Biden is pressing Netanyahu to make a choice in the next few days to move towards a political end to the war, to pull troops out of Gaza, let food into the starving people there. And by the way, figure out how to negotiate, how to bring those hostages home. There are still 100 of them held by Hamas.
Yep. All right, Margaret, thank you so much for joining us. Margaret Brennan, folks, she is the host of Face the Nation Sunday morning, the CBS television network. And you can hear Margaret Brennan this weekend on Bloomberg Radio. Listen to Face the Nation Sunday at 2 p.m. in New York, Washington, D.C., and 92.9 FM in Boston. That's Face the Nation this Sunday at 2 on Bloomberg Radio. All right, David, Lisa, special guest.
Got a call coming in.
A call coming in from some unknown parts of Europe. Mr. Tom
not a U.S.
Keene.
number.
No way.
No, it is not a U.S. number. Co-host of Bloomberg Surveillance. Tom, thanks for calling in. Where are you?
Well, team coverage from Rome, Italy, and it's a sight to behold. I'll tell you, it is something to see the two parts of Italy clashing, and that the boom of tourist economy is for real. Even here in October, it's got a feel of August to it, of high summer, with the streets packed. And at the same time, this morning, the streets are empty outside our hotel, the Motel 6 here. And the streets were empty because there was a strike of Stellantis workers. They've absolutely had it, with a 70% reduction in Italian auto manufacturing. So it's in Italy. It's an interesting view of two Italys right now before the election.
We admire you for staying at the Motel 6 when the Howard Johnson was full, Tom. What are folks there saying about the election here in the United States? We've spent so much time this morning talking about the latest with the campaign here with Joe Matthew and with Margaret Brennan just a moment ago. Yeah. I know that you are one to sidle up to a bar and chat with those seated there alongside. What are folks telling you about how they're perceiving what's happening with our American politics?
It comes up in every single conversation, and I must admit it comes up quickly in every conversation. As part of it of being distant from it, a lot of American tourists here simply celebrating not being part of it for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. But at the same time, they're focused on it. I must say the news, David, as you and Paul were talking with Margaret, the news out of Israel, the Hamas leader, was front and center last night.
Tom, so I know you're out there scouting properties, for your second, third homes. I know that's certainly a thing. How about just the economy there in Italy? You tell you the tourist economy is strong, but maybe that's just the surface, one aspect of it.
Right. It permeates every moment you're here. They are so proud of their boom economy. They're leading the way. All of Southern Europe, Greece, Italy, even Spain, with some challenges, doing better. And they just let you know right from the start, right from the airport, that this is a boom economy, and it's a 12-month tourism economy. Tourism here now, guys, is 14% of the economy. It's up 40% in a decade, is a piece of the economy. Last year, 25% of the jobs created had to do with tourism.
And Tom, we got a minute left here. You said boom economy. How is the shopping going? Have you been in and out the stores? Is the credit card getting charged up?
Yeah, I'm glad, Lisa, you brought that up. It's painful. I thought Fendi was a disease, and I've learned it's not a disease. It is what it is, and they got the whole thing set up with a value-added tax. But it is a boom economy. You fall down the Spanish Steps, and they await. Tiffany was front and center as an American institution, but they make very clear here they're ready and able to help you refund your VAT tax at the earliest convenience.
Give our best to Mrs. Keene when she's back from the Prada store.
We will.
Okay.
Tom Keene, thank you very much, Tom Keene. Surveillance reporting from Rome, Italy. They're giving us the latest there on the
truly
the
global here on surveillance.
Yeah, global. I mean, he's our roaming reporter today. He's in Rome, which is where exactly you would want Tom Keene to be. You send me down to rural South Carolina, that's fine. Alex Steele and myself. Tom Keene.
Spanish moss and the Rome. Spanish steps. Yes.
Exactly right. All right, looking at this market here. We're going to get it open for you in just moments. Futures mixed here as we look at it. Yields 4.07% on your 10-year Treasury. We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg Morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo alongside Paul Sweeney, David Gura with your opening bell report. So will Netflix earnings continue to give that boost to big tech? Shares have been higher in pre-market after it added 5 million new subscribers in the third quarter, even with those lingering impacts from the Hollywood strikes. So as we get started here, let's check in right now. We'll start with the S&P 500 first because they checked in first, up 0.3% at 18 points at 5,859. The Dow, little change, down about 22 points at 43,211. The NASDAQ, here we go. Right now, it is up about 0.5%, 89 points at 18,465. We have the two-year yield, 3.94%. That's down 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year, 4.07%, and that's down 2 basis points. We have Brent crude, $73 a barrel. WTI crude down about 1% at $69 a barrel. We have spot gold higher, $2,705 an ounce. At the open, we're also checking in with Netflix. There you go, up about 8%. That is your Bloomberg opening bell report. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate that. David Gura in for Tom Keene. We just heard is in Rome.
Good to hear from him.
It's good to hear from him. You know, it's it's an early afternoon over there. Probably a little, get a little adult beverage just to kind of start the afternoon. Maybe a little white wine to kind of start the afternoon. No problem there whatsoever. We're here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. That's where we are, and we're streaming live on YouTube as well here. And we're also we've got a lot of other content coming out of this place.
Lisa was talking about Netflix, and I know that you know that world so well. What stood out to you from those earnings? And again, it strikes me that this is one of those companies where quarter after quarter there's a speculation: is it going to deliver? Is the growth going to be the same? We saw what they did with passwords. How have they navigated this so well as you've seen?
They've done just a phenomenal job. They're the leaders. They created this whole business, and they made the early investment 15 years ago in program. They spent 2x, 3x, 4x what the traditional cable and broadcast networks were spending on programming. Everybody thought they were crazy. And for 7, 8, 9 years, they looked crazy because they didn't make any money. But now they make huge money, huge profits. And they're the leader. Everybody else is just trying to catch up. So they put up a great quarter, even when they had to deal with not a lot of new programming because of the strike. So some pretty good stuff there. I don't know. I'm in the camp, David. I kind of feel like we're living in a soft landing. I think the Fed's kind of got it right. I don't know. So let's talk to somebody who really does know this stuff. Danielle DiMartino Booth. She's the CEO and Chief Strategist of QI Research. Danielle, thanks so much for joining us here. Again, we got the retail sales data this week, which seemed to me at least confirm that the Fed is in the process of or has already negotiated kind of a soft landing. I'm not sure if that's a consensus, but that's just kind of how it feels to me. What do you think?
Well, I would agree with you. That is certainly the consensus. And I have to take my hats off to Bloomberg because the Bloomberg Economics has done such a good job of kind of parsing through the seasonal adjustments that in September of 2024 have been nothing short of extraordinary, whether you're talking about ADP's largest seasonal adjustment in history. The same can be said for the seasonal factor for non-farm payrolls. And yesterday, if we looked at the raw unadjusted data on retail sales, we found out that retail sales on a year-over-year basis are actually slightly down year over year. So you have to be mindful, I think, of appreciating the statistician's effect on the weather because seasonal adjustments are, in fact, man-made in nature. So we have to be careful about whether we're calling something a soft landing on its surface or it really is in reality.
I pick up on you saying the word slightly there to describe some of those kind of down numbers that are outside of expectations. And I just wonder sort of how policymakers are thinking about that holistically. And I know that you have experience within the Federal Reserve Board of Governors and the system. And what do you think? If they say that they're data dependent, they're moving meeting by meeting, how do they put all of this together? That's the question I keep coming back to.
Well, it's interesting because in public appearances, Chair Jerome Powell has been much more forthright. He started by talking about the Beige Book, which is, of course, an internal Fed document that's created across all 12 districts that indicated that consumer spending was declining nationwide in all 12 districts. And since that mention at the podium, if you will, he has been much more forthright in noting outside of traditional formal official channels. Indeed.com, for example, is one of the data providers that he has mentioned. So you can tell that they're data dependent, but not dependent solely on data that are coming out of statistical agencies in Washington, D.C. They're paying attention to what's also happening on the ground.
Do you buy this argument that they're data driven and not data point driven? I keep hearing people making that distinction.
That distinction is fair. It's fair to make because historically speaking, at least, I had a long discussion yesterday with Tom Honig, formerly of the Kansas City Fed and the FDIC. And, one of the complaints about the Fed is that it's too reactionary in its policymaking as opposed to being proactive. And that, you kind of get that feel when you see that the Fed scrambling during blackout periods to change market pricing for future Fed moves, that it's saying, oh my gosh, we got this one other data point. Maybe we should be going 50 basis points and not 25. That's indicative of an institution that is still very reactionary in how it crafts policy.
So, Danielle, how about on the other side here, from inflation, it's the labor market. I guess there's two ways to look at it. One is, hey, we're fully employed or close to it at 4.1% unemployment. Maybe another way to look at it, which I know people like you tend to do, is look underneath the cover there and see some challenging trends. How do you think about the U.S. labor market these days?
So if you're just looking at the current earnings season, which we're in the middle of right now, this is like full-blown storm, you see that a lot of companies that are beating their estimates are doing so because they're accompanying their earnings releases with announcements of large layoffs. If you're just tracking what we've seen in terms of earnings reports released with layoff announcements, we're already up to 75,000, and we're only halfway through October at this point. So the C-suite occupants of the United States right now are very much still focused on cost cutting as a way to make their bottom lines, because in many cases they're missing on their top line, on their revenue.
I wanted to ask you just about the role the Fed plays kind of in global central banking more broadly. We saw the ECB cutting yesterday. And I wonder just sort of, I know that there's no kind of deliberate coordination among these central banks, but by the Fed embarking on this rate cutting cycle, what did that do to kind of free up or change the policies of these other banks? And how are we seeing that affect kind of the macroeconomy?
Well, it does certainly seem like release the hounds. It seems like when the Fed finally made that first move on September the 18th to begin lowering rates, that it gave other central banks license to be a little bit more aggressive in their take on easing going forward. Look north to our border with Canada, and the Bank of Canada really was kind of the trendsetter for a while. That was an unusual dynamic, if you will. But now it seems like other central banks are indeed taking their cue from the Fed, and that takes us back to how things normally operate with the world's biggest central bank.
UK headline CPI came in 1.7%. It looks like the UK has got their inflation story well under control. Are the numbers accurate in your mind, and how did they do it?
Well, a lot of it comes down to following, BCY Go, and the bankruptcy cycle in the UK or Germany has really been extraordinary. And it's the companies, I think, right now that are leading the central banks and forcing their hands to ease because they're losing pricing power. And we're seeing natural gas prices, rents back up here in the United States. We're seeing other sources of inflation over which the Fed has very little control. We're seeing echoes of that in other countries that is indeed dragging down their inflation. But at the same time, winter is coming. I don't say that as a cliche, but energy is going to be kind of the change maker in whether or not the Bank of England or the ECB or the Fed, they're going to be able to maintain the pace of rate cuts. I think that's a big unknown at this point as we look to the November the 7th next Fed statement.
That's right where I want to go. So all these policymakers will gather around that big table in the Eccles building. We might not even know who the next president is by the time they meet. Yes, the meeting has been postponed or kicked back a day, but there's still so much uncertainty surrounding who's going to win the election, when we're going to find out who's going to win the election. Just from your perspective, how does that complicate the Fed's ability to do its job and make a decision on future cuts? Yes, the Fed's not political, historically independent, et cetera, but this is a really strange moment for the Federal Reserve.
It is, and the Federal Reserve has not been very forthright or open about fiscal policy under Jay Powell. And that's kind of unique because when you look at some of his predecessors, they were much more vocal. And now that Fed policy has such a huge effect on the trajectory of fiscal spending, I saw an estimate that said that the difference between a Harris and a Trump victory could be $4 trillion in deficit spending going forward simply due to tax policy. The Fed does indeed, around that huge oval table in the Eccles building that you referenced, the Fed has to keep fiscal policy and where it's going in the discussion, whether or not they choose to be public about it or not.
Danielle, thank you so much for joining us. Danielle DiMartino Booth, CEO and Chief Strategist at QI Research, formerly at the Dallas Fed, a really informed voice and a great follow on social media as well to give you on her thoughts on the Federal Reserve and central banks and the economy as well. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul, David, Lisa. A top Hamas political official confirms the death of the group's leader, Yahya Sinwar, and said the militant group would not release more hostages until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. Also on Friday, the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah vowed to launch a new phase of fighting against invading Israeli troops. Sinwar was the chief architect of last year's attack on Israel that sparked the multi-front war. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin says, though, Sinwar's death provides an opportunity
to achieve a lasting ceasefire, to end this awful war, and to rush humanitarian aid into Gaza.
He also said those who are holding hostages should release them immediately.
The hostages should not have to suffer one more hour in captivity.
Secretary Austin called for ending the conflicts in both Gaza and Lebanon through principled diplomacy. Former President Trump spoke at the New York Archdiocese annual Al Smith dinner last night. Vice President Kamala Harris was on video, but she did not attend in person, which Trump seized on.
Catholics, you got to vote for me. Just remember. You better remember I'm here, and she's not. I could have done that too.
Harris instead made multiple stops across the state of Wisconsin.
Part of my plan is about helping entrepreneurs start and grow small businesses.
Today, Harris and Trump will be in Michigan. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony is tomorrow. One of those that will be inducted will be Peter Frampton. The guitarist says he is still surprised that he has been chosen for the induction.
I didn't quite realize how many people out there wanted me almost more than I did to be in the Hall of Fame. So that's what blew me away. It was amazing.
Other inductees include Mary J. Blige, Cher, the Dave Matthews Band, Ozzy Osbourne, and Kool and the Gang. Global news, 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. Get down, get down. This is Bloomberg.
There you go, folks. Michael Barr bringing you the news and a little something extra. You know, on my tour.
As always.
As always.
Yes.
On my tour of Ireland a few weeks ago, we were joined. Part of our tour group was a group from the Villages in Florida.
Notable retirement community.
Yes, so that got my attention. We got a story on the Bloomberg Terminal today. Florida golf carts line up in the Villages for upbeat Democrats. I didn't know the
golf cart parade.
Republicans outnumber Democrats 3-1 at the Villages. I didn't know that. So, and there's like 76,000 people that live in the Villages.
I've never been, but it's a wild place and seen as a barometer of the election.
Yes.
I mean, it's massive, though.
And it's a big thing. When you do these political parades, the residents come in their golf carts, and they have parades and stuff. And so
they didn't sell you on it, though.
No, they didn't quite sell me on being in the middle of Florida. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's not Orlando. It's outside of Orlando in Ocala. But they love it. And good for them. So there were some great folks we met. We had a good time with them. But anyway, political down there in the Villages. How about that? This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Rally in some of the world's biggest tech companies giving stocks a good lift with the market heading toward its longest weekly winning run in 2024. In fact, if you take a look at the IMAP feature of your terminal of the 11 major industry groups, the biggest boost coming from communication services. Then you see media, entertainment. Then you click through, you see movies and entertainment. And yes, at the top is Netflix, followed by Walt Disney and Warner Brothers Discovery. So we get to NASDAQ futures up 0.6%, 124 points. The Dow down 0.2%, 125 points. The S&P 500 up about 0.2%. To the bond market, the 2-year yield 3.95%. That's down 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.07%, and that is down 1 basis point. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and David.
All right, Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. We appreciate it. David Gura sitting in for Tom Keene. I'm Paul Sweeney. We're live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, and we are streaming live on YouTube as well. So check us out there. Bloomberg Podcast is a search. That'll get it for you. It is football season. It is Friday, which means we talk Harvard football. Andrew Orrick, head football coach of Harvard University, joins us. Andrew, let's just look back a week ago. My colleague here, David Gura.
Do we have to?
Yes, we have to start
Cornell
there.
alumnus wonders, do we have to look back on the game from last weekend?
Coach, tell us about the Cornell game.
For us. Yeah, it was a fun game for us. Friday night games are a lot of fun. We had a very long drive afterwards, but it was a lot more enjoyable, driving back after a win.
So, Coach, this week you guys, the Crimson, are playing host to Holy Cross. I guess this is your final non-conference game of the season. Talk to us about Holy Cross. What are they going to bring to the stadium?
Yeah, their record is deceiving because they played a couple really good teams early in the season and had some close losses versus UNH and URI, who are both top 25 teams now in FCS football. They do a great job taking the ball away on defense, and they have a really, really strong running game on offense and some really talented receivers, and the quarterback has a really strong arm, along with aggressive special teams. So it's a really good challenge for us, and a good game kind of leading into the final stretch of the season where it's all Ivy League, and our guys are motivated. There's a little bit of a rivalry building here with Holy Cross. I know we've played them a lot of times over the years, and our guys are motivated for this one.
Coach, let me ask you about a pair of players, both of whom are economics concentrators from New Jersey. First is Jaden Craig, your quarterback, and had an incredible performance in that game. Painful as it is for me to say that, as a Cornell alum. Tell us a bit about sort of how he played in that first quarter in particular, and sort of what you're looking for from him in the game this weekend, and when you guys face Princeton the week after that.
Yeah, he's gotten better and better every week this season. He finished last year as a starter, and had a great offseason. And it's been building on it. Really strong arm, smart football player, decisive with his reads, and we're excited kind of how he can continue to build on that. Because of how talented he is in our receiving corps is. We've been probably throwing the ball more than what the Harvard faithful are used to, and that's a testament to him and those receivers. So we're expecting big things from him here moving forward.
The other one I wanted to ask about is Shane McLaughlin, and we've seen him, and if you listen to the game over the weekend, heard that he's been kind of fighting an injury. How's he doing? Can you give us an update on him? He's your running back.
Yeah, he's working through it, a lower body injury, and he's our captain, and he wants to play in every possible game the rest of the way here. So he's attacking his rehab. We're hoping to have him for tomorrow, but we'll see kind of where he's at. It's definitely day-to-day here as we move forward with him.
All right, Coach, thanks so much for joining us. Coach Andrew Ork, he's the head football coach at Harvard University. They're going to take on Holy Cross tomorrow. You can hear that on the Holy Cross Crusaders. They head to Harvard tomorrow for a non-conference game against the Crimson. Kickoff is set for noon Eastern. Pregame starts at 11:45 a.m. on Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, so you could check it out there. And again, that was a decisive win over your Big Red of Cornell. So I'm just going to throw that out there.
Thank you again for rubbing that in.
Joanne Bianco joins us here. She's a partner at Bond Blocks, and one of the many reasons we like to check in with Joanne, because Bond Blocks does a great job, just as name implies. They have ETFs that really focus on the fixed income space. We get a really good view of what's happening in that part of the world. Joanne, thanks so much for joining us here. Love to get your thoughts on kind of how you guys are thinking about maybe this Federal Reserve and how they're going to behave going over the next several meetings, given that we've had some pretty good economic data.
Yeah, it seems like they shouldn't have to be in any kind of rush to cut rates. And, the market has time and time again this year been overly optimistic about the timing and the number of cuts. And, the economy continues to just be very resilient. And, that just translates into like pretty supportive conditions for a lot of areas of fixed income. So yeah, we do see the gamut with our broad lineup of ETFs. So thanks for having me.
You say a lot of areas of fixed income. What are you looking at and recommending in particular?
Yeah, I mean, high yield was our top pick last year. It's been our top pick again this year. The resilient economy has meant that corporate credit all the way down to the CCC category has performed very well. In fact, CCCs are up almost twice as much as double Bs this year. They're up over 12% in total returns. So that's just been an area of, where the continued resilience of the economic environment is shown through all the way down to CCC rated credit.
Joanna, I'm very comfortable getting darn near 4% in a 2-year treasury. Are there some ETFs, bond blocks that can kind of do that for me?
Absolutely. We have a lineup of target duration U.S. Treasury ETFs. There's 8 ETFs along the curve, starting with a 6-month ETF, XHLF. And that's probably what you would be, it would be great for you to do because it's like a 4.5% yield. real low volatility, very low expense ratio.
Joanne, let me ask you lastly just sort of how you're looking ahead to this Fed meeting and what the Fed may or may not do. And I know that Tom is fond of calling it a parlor game, sort of how deep the Fed will cut at that next meeting. But just give us your thinking on that. I think a theme through today's show has just sort of been how the Fed might be processing the variety of data that we've been getting, both hard and soft data on the economy.
Right.
What's your latest sense and latest expectation of what the Fed will do when they meet in early November?
Well, I mean, the balance of the data has been strong, so showing economic strength. So to us, that means that it's less likely that they're going to have to cut another 50 at the next meeting. That's not on the table in our view. It still looks like the markets are expecting 25 basis points cuts for both November and December. We have no reason not to think that they continued in a more measured pace to reduce rates, but the market's not screaming for, or economic conditions are not screaming for them to have to go much faster than that.
All right, Joanne, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. Joanne Bianco, partner at Bond Blocks. If you want ETFs that target fixed income space, any duration, any type of security, they've got the ETFs for it. So we love talking to Joanne about the bond market from the ETF perspective. Explain to me the Cornell structure real quickly in 30 seconds. Why Ivy League and state school?
A land grant school and the youngest of the Ivy League schools, but some of the colleges, some of the constituent colleges are New York State schools. So there's a giant agriculture school, for instance, and that is partially subsidized by the state and less expensive to go to. So the move to make would be to transfer from one to the other if you wanted to be. Everyone gets the same degree, but
certain colleges are part of the Ivy League.
It's all under the aegis of Cornell University, but they have these sort of state land grant schools within it. So there are 7 or 8 constituent colleges. Arts and Sciences is the expensive non-state one, engineering as well. But then there's the Ag School, there's School of Industrial Labor Relations. It's a funny makeup, but it leads to a very eclectic student body. And
Right. So if I want to apply to Cornell as a New York State resident and I want to do the Ag School, am I competing against the kids that want to go to the Ivy or considered the Ivy League?
No, because you apply to the college that you want to go to. So it is, one might say, a bit easier to get into. And then in those
Paul's
schools,
trying to get in the back door.
Yeah, he wants that second college degree.
Exactly.
No, you have to designate what you go to. But once you get there, you can transfer from one college to the next if you wanted to.
Interesting. Now I kind of got it. All right, very good. So a unique.
I'll put in a good word for you, Paul.
Yes, put it in a Word document. Put it in a PowerPoint. That'll be very helpful. I've always wondered about that, so we'll have to see. We are celebrating the musicians and the musical acts that are getting into the Hall of Fame here. Kool and the Gang, Richmond, Virginia, 1983, Richmond Coliseum. What a show. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.